Hello again, guys. Welcome back to my real vlog channel, and as always, let's spend some time together. I want to spend this evening with my painting by numbers. I will proceed with horse project. So let's switch. To the DIY studio. Now let's switch to DIY studio. Oh, hi again, Maggie. I'm great. How are you? How was your day? Okay, we have unfinished 5. This one will be good. Yeah, it's painting by numbers. I love to spend evenings with it. It's like meditation. Let's... Where we were? 5? Yeah, I think it was 5. Dissolve it a bit. The horse. I hope you can see it. But nobody understands what was it. So now you don't do it? It's actually taken a lot of time, so we need a lot of time to try some hobbies. Thank you. When you tell that nobody understand what was it, it remembering me Little Prince. Maybe you read it before. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry, author. Oh, it was a different book, and I don't remember which one. And clothes. Never tried. I'm not like artist, just hobby, so I don't have a lot of experience in it. When I was young, I painted on my jeans. It was fun. I had very artistic jeans. That's it, as I remember. It was a long time ago. It's still 5.
And what was it that would walk up an almost vertical bank in such a haphazard manner? Besides, they were not like imprints. I prodded the edge of one of these circles with a piece of grass. It remained unmoved. I began to think the mark was caused by some curious way in which the moss grew. I probed again, more vigorously, and suddenly my stomach gave a clutch of tremendous excitement. It was as though my grass stalk had found a hidden spring, for the whole circle lifted up like a trapdoor. As I stared, I saw to my amazement that it was, in fact, a trapdoor lined with silk, with a neatly beveled edge that snugly fitted into the mouth of the silk-lined shaft and concealed. The edge of the door was fastened to the lip of the tunnel by a small flap of silk that acted as a hinge. I gazed at this magnificent piece of workmanship and wondered what on earth could have made it. Peering down the silken tunnel, I could see nothing. I poked my grass stalk down, but there was no response. For a long time, I sat staring at this fantastic home, trying to decide what sort of beast had made it. I thought that it might be a wasp of some sort, but had never heard of a wasp that fitted its nest with secret doors. I felt that I must get to the bottom of this problem immediately. I would go down and ask George if he knew what this mysterious beast was. Calling Roger, who was busy trying to uproot an olive tree, I set off at a brisk trot. I arrived at George's villa out of breath, bursting with suppressed excitement, gave a perfunctory knock at the door and dashed in. Only then did I realize he had company. Seated in a chair near him was a figure which, at first glance, I decided must be George's brother, for he also wore a beard. He was, however, in contrast to George, immaculately dressed in a grey flannel suit with waistcoat, a spotless white shirt, a tasteful but sombre tie, and large, solid, highly polished boots. I paused on the threshold, embarrassed, while George surveyed me sardonically. "Good evening," he greeted me. "From the joyful speed of your entry, I take it that you have not come for a little extra tuition." I apologized for the intrusion, and then told George about the curious nests I had found. "Thank heavens you're here, Theodore," he said to his bearded companion. "I shall now be able to hand the problem over to expert hands. Jerry, this is Dr. Theodore Stephanides," said George. "He is an expert on practically everything you care to mention, and what you don't mention, he does. He, like you, is an eccentric nature lover. Theodore, this is Jerry Durrell." I said, "How do you do?" politely, but to my surprise, the bearded man rose to his feet, stepped briskly across the room, and held out a large white hand. "Very pleased to meet you," he said, apparently addressing his beard, and gave me a quick, shy glance from twinkling blue eyes. I shook his hand and said I was very pleased to meet him, too. Then we stood in awkward silence, while George watched us, grinning. "Well, Theodore," he said at last, "and what do you think produced these strange secret passages?" Theodore clasped his hands behind his back, lifted himself on his toes several times, his boots squeaking protestingly, and gravely considered the floor. "Well, yeah," he said, his words coming slowly and meticulously. "It sounds to me as though they might be the burrows of the trapdoor spider. It is a species which used to be quite common here in Corfu. That is to say, when I say common, I suppose I have found some 30 or 40 specimens during the time I have been here." "Yes," said Theodore. "I feel that it's more than probable that that is what they are. However, I may be mistaken." He rose and fell on his toes, squeaking gently, and then he shot me a keen glance. "Perhaps, if they are not too far away, we could go and verify it," he suggested tentatively. "I mean to say, if you have nothing better to do and it's not too far." His voice trailed away on a faintly interrogative note. I said that they were only just up the hill, not really far. Said Theodore. "Don't let him drag you about all over the place, Theodore," said George. No, not at all," said Theodore. "I was just about to leave, and I can easily walk that way back. It is quite a simple matter for me to cut down through the olive groves and reach Canoni." He picked up a neat grey Homburg and placed it squarely on his head. At the door, he held out his hand and shook George's greeting. "Thank you for a delightful tea," he said, and stumped gravely off along the path by my side. As we walked along, I studied him covertly. He had a straight, well-shaped nose, a humorous mouth lurking in the ash-blonde beard, straight, rather bushy eyebrows, under which his eyes, keen but with a twinkle in them and laughter wrinkles at the corners, surveyed the world. He strode along energetically, humming to himself. When we came to a ditch full of stagnant water, he stopped for a moment and stared down into it, his beard bristling. He said conversationally, "Daphnia magna." He rasped at his beard with his thumb, and then set off down the path again. "Unfortunately," he said to me, "I was coming out to see some people, friends of mine, and so I did not bring my collecting bag with me. It is a pity, for that ditch might have contained something." When we branched off the fairly smooth path we had been travelling along and started up the stony goat track, I expected some sort of protest, but Theodore strode behind me with unabated vigour, still humming. At length we came to the gloomy olive grove, and I led Theodore to the bank and pointed out the mysterious trapdoor. He peered down at it, his eyes narrowed. He said. Yes. He produced from his waistcoat pocket a tiny penknife, opened it, inserted the point of the blade delicately under the little door, and flipped it back. He peered down the tunnel, blew down it, and then let the trapdoor fall into place again. Yes, they are the burrows of trapdoor spiders, he said, but this one does not appear to be inhabited. Generally, the creature will hold on to the trapdoor with her legs, or rather her claws, and she holds on with such tenacity that you have to be careful, or you will damage the door trying to force it open. Yes, these are the burrows of the females, of course. The male makes a similar burrow, but it is only about half the size. I remarked that it was the most curious structure I had seen. The spider, of course, waits inside its burrow until some insect, a fly or a grasshopper, chances to walk past. They can judge, it seems, whether the insect is close enough to be caught. If it is, the spider pops out of its hole and catches the creature. Now, when the male comes in search of the female, he must walk over the moss to the trapdoor, and I have often wondered why it is that he is not devoured by the female in mistake. It is possible, of course, that his footsteps sound different, or he may make some sort of sound which the female recognizes. We walked down the hill in silence. When we reached the place where the path forked, I said that I must leave. Well, I'll say goodbye, he said, staring at his boots. I have enjoyed meeting you. We stood in silence for a moment. Theodore was afflicted with the acute embarrassment that always seemed to overwhelm him when greeting or saying goodbye to someone. He stared hard at his boots for a moment longer, and then he held out his hand and shook mine gravely. Goodbye, he said. I expect we shall meet again. He turned and stumped off down the hill, swinging his stick, staring about him with observant eyes. I watched him out of sight, and then walked slowly in the direction of the villa. I was at once confused and amazed by Theodore. First, since he was obviously a scientist of considerable repute, and he was the only person I had met until now who seemed to share my enthusiasm for zoology. Secondly, I was extremely flattered to find that he treated me and talked to me as though I was his own age. I liked him for this, as I was not talked down to by my family, and I took a rather poor view of any outsider trying to do so. But Theodore not only talked to me as though I was grown up, but also as though I was as knowledgeable as him. 2 days later, Leslie came back from an excursion into town and handed me a small parcel. Met that scientist bloke, he said. This is for you. Incredulously, I stared at the parcel. Surely it couldn't be for me. There must be some mistake, for a great scientist would hardly bother to send me parcels. I turned it over, and there, written on it in neat, spidery writing, was my name. tore off the paper as quickly as I could. Inside was a small box and a letter. My dear Jerry Dublin, I wondered after our conversation the other day if it might not assist your investigations of the local natural history to have some form of magnifying instrument. I am therefore sending you this pocket microscope in the hope that it will be of some use to you. It is of course not of very fine magnification, but you will find it sufficient for feeling. With best wishes, yours sincerely, Theo Stefanidis. P.S. If you have nothing better to do on Thursday, perhaps you would care to come to tea. I could then show you some of my microscope slides. During the last days of the dying summer, and throughout the warm, wet winter that followed, tea with Theodore became a weekly affair. Every Thursday I would set out, my pockets bulging with matchboxes and test tubes full of specimens, to be driven into the town by Spiro. It was an appointment that I would not have missed for anything. Theodore would welcome me in his study, a room that met with my full approval. It was, in my opinion, just what a room should be. The walls were lined with tall bookshelves, filled with volumes on freshwater biology, botany, astronomy, medicine, folklore, and similar fascinating and sensible subjects. Interspersed with these were selections of ghost and crime stories. Thus, Sherlock Holmes rubbed shoulders with Darwin, and Lefano with Fire, in what I considered to be a thoroughly well-balanced library. At one window of the room stood Theodore's telescope, its nose in the sky like a howling dog, while the sills of every window bore a parade of jars and bottles containing minute freshwater fauna, whirling and whirling among the delicate fronds of green.
The courier.
On one side of the room
Be right
was a
back.
massive desk, piled high with scrapbooks, microphotographs, X-ray plates, diaries, notebooks. On the opposite side of the room was the microscope, with a powerful lamp on the jointed stem, hanging like a lily over the flat boxes that housed Theodore's collection of slides. The microscopes themselves, gleaming like magpies, were housed under a series of beehive-like domes of glass. How are you? Theodore would inquire, as if I were a complete stranger, and give me his characteristic handshake, a sharp downward tug, like a man testing a knot in a rope.
We have a parcel. Well, let's see what's inside. I believe it's brown for my pets. With brown. Yeah, it is. Tomorrow we will clean my pets, and we will need it. Let's see.
By our side would be an ever-growing fire. Outside,
Back.
warm wind would shudder the shutters, making them creak. Raindrops would chase each other down the window like transparent tap. Tea would arrive, cakes squatting on cushions of cream, toast in a melting shawl of butter, cups agleam, and a faint wisp of steam rising from the teapot spout. Sitting there, neat and correct in his tweed suit, Theodore would chew his toast slowly and methodically, his beard bristling, his eyes kindling with enthusiasm at each new subject that swam into our conversation. But on the other hand, it is impossible to say there is no life on Mars. It is, in my opinion, quite possible that some form of life will be discovered there. Should we ever succeed in getting there. But there is no reason to suppose that any form of life found would be identical. To me, his knowledge seemed inexhaustible. He was a rich vein of information, and I mined him assiduously. No matter what the subject, Theodore could contribute something interesting to it. At last, I would hear Spiro honking his horn in the street below, and I would rise reluctantly to go. Driving back along the dark, rain-washed roads, Spiro humming richly as he squatted behind the wheel, I would dream of the spring to come and of all the wonderful creatures Theodore and I would capture. Spring affected the family in a variety of ways. Larry bought himself a guitar with a large barrel of strong red wine. He interspersed his bouts of work by playing haphazardly on the instrument and singing English love songs in a meek tenor voice, with frequent pauses for refreshment. This would soon induce a mood of melancholy, and the love songs would pause to inform whichever.
Thank you for follow, Oisin.
Spring for him did not
Thank you.
the beginning of the new year, but the death of the old one. The grave, he would proclaim, making the guitar rumble ominously, yawned a little wider with each season. One evening, the rest of us had gone out and left Mother and Larry alone together. Larry had spent the evening singing more and more dismally, until he had succeeded in working them both into a fit of acute depression. They attempted to alleviate this state with the aid of wine, but unfortunately, this had the reverse effect. When we returned, we were somewhat startled to be greeted by Mother, standing at the door of the villa with a hurricane lantern. She informed us with ladylike precision and dignity that she wished to be buried under the rose bushes. The novelty of this lay in the fact that she had chosen such an accessible place for the disposal of her remains. Mother spent a lot of her spare time choosing places to be buried in, but they were generally situated in the most remote areas, and one had visions of the funeral cortege dropping exhausted by the wayside long before it had reached the grave. When left undisturbed by Larry, however, spring for Mother meant an endless array of fresh vegetables with which to experiment, and a riot of new flowers to delight her in the garden. There streamed from the kitchen a tremendous number of new dishes, soups, stews, savouries and curries, each richer, more fragrant and more exotic than the last. Larry began to suffer from dyspepsia. Scorning the simple remedy of eating less, he procured an immense tin of bicarbonate of soda and would solemnly take a dose after every meal. "Why do you eat so much if it upsets you, dear?" Mother asked. "It would be an insult to your cooking to eat less."
Samson lamp again.
"You're being totally fat. It's very bad for you." "Nonsense," said Larry. "I'm not getting fat, Mother, am I?" Surveying him critically. "It's all your fault," Larry said unreasonably. "You will keep tempting me with these aromatic delicacies. You're driving me to ulcers. I shall have to go on a diet. What's a good diet, Margot?" "Well," said Margot, launching herself with enthusiasm into her favourite topic, "you could try the orange juice and salad one. That's awfully good. There's the milk and raw vegetable one. That's good too, but it takes a little time. Or there's the boiled fish and brown bread one. I don't know what that's like. I haven't tried it yet." "Dear God!" exclaimed Larry, genuinely shocked. "Are those diets?" "Yes, and they're all very good ones," said Margot earnestly. "I've been trying the orange juice one, and it's done wonders for my acne." "No," said Larry firmly. "I'm not going to do it if it means that I have to champ my way like a damned ungulate through bushels of raw fruit and vegetables. You'll have to resign yourself to the fact that I shall be taken from you at an early age, suffering from fatty degeneration of the heart." At the next meal, he took the precaution of having a large dose of bicarbonate beforehand, and then protested bitterly that the food tasted queer. Margot was always badly affected by the spring. Her personal appearance, always of absorbing interest to her, now became almost an obsession. Piles of freshly laundered clothes filled her bedroom, while the washing line sagged under the weight of clothes newly washed. Singing shrilly and untunefully, she would drift about the villa, carrying piles of flimsy underwear or bottles of scent. She would seize every opportunity to dive into the bathroom in a swirl of white towels, and once in there, she was as hard to dislodge as a limpet from a rock. The family, in turn, would bellow and batter on the door, getting no more satisfaction than an assurance that she was nearly finished, an assurance which we had learnt by bitter experience not to have any faith in. Eventually, she would emerge, glowing and immaculate, drift from the house, humming, to sunbathe in the olive groves, go down to the sea and swim. It was during one of these excursions to the sea that she met an over-good-looking young Turk. With unusual modesty, she did not inform anyone of her frequent raving assignation to this paragon, feeling, as she told us later, that we would not be interested. It was, of course, Spiro who discovered it. He watched over Margot's welfare with the earnest concern of a St. Bernard, and there was precious little she could do without Spiro knowing about it. He cornered Mother in the kitchen one morning, glanced surreptitiously round to make sure they were not overheard, sighed deeply, and broke the news to her. I'm very sorry to have to tell you this, Mrs. Darrows, but I think she wants to know. Mother had by now become quite used to Spiro's conspiratorial air when he came to deliver some item of information about the family, and it no longer worried her. What's the matter now, Spiro? She asked. It's Missy Margot, said Spiro sorrowfully. What about her? Spiro glanced around uneasily. A man? Oh, yes, I did know, said Mother, lying valiantly. Spiro hitched up his trousers over his belly. But did you know he's a Turk? He questioned in tones of blood-curdling ferocity. A Turk? Said Mother vaguely. No, I didn't know he was a Turk. What's wrong with that? Spiro looked horrified. Gollies, Mrs. Darrows, I wouldn't trust this son of a bitch Turk with any girls. He'll cut their throats, that's what he'll do. Honest to God, Mrs. Darrows, it's not safe, Missy Margot swimming with him. All right, Spiro, said Mother soothingly. I'll speak to Margot about it. I just thought you ought to know, that's all, but don't you worry. If he did anything to Missy Margot, I'd fix the bastard, Spiro assured her earnestly. Acting on the information received, Mother mentioned the matter to Margot in a slightly less blood-curdling manner than Spiro's, and suggested the young Turk be brought up to tea. Delighted, Margot went off to fetch him, while Mother hastily made a cake and some scones, and warned the rest of us to be on our best behaviour. The Turk, when he arrived, turned out to be a tall young man, with meticulously waved hair, a flashy smile that managed to convey the minimum of humour with the maximum of condescension. He had all the sleek, smug self-possession of a cat in season. He pressed Mother's hand to his lips as though he was conferring an honour on her, and scattered the largesse of his smile for the rest of us. Mother, feeling the hackles of the family rising, threw herself desperately into the breach. Lovely having you. Wanted to so often. Never seems time, you know. Days simply fly past. Margot's told us so much about you. Do love us, she said, smiling with dazzling charm and handing him a piece of cake. So kind, murmured the Turk, leaving us in some doubt as to whether he was referring to us or himself. There was a pause. He's on holiday here, announced Margot suddenly, as though it was something quite unique. Really, said Larry hospitably. On holiday. Amazing. I had a holiday once, said Leslie indistinctly through a mouthful of cake. Remember it clearly. Mother rattled the tea things nervously and glared. Sugar? She inquired fruitily. Sugar in your tea? Thank you, yes. There was another short silence, during which we all sat and watched Mother pouring out the tea, searching her mind desperately for a topic of conversation. At length, the Turk turned to Larry. You're right, I believe, he said with complete confidence. Larry's eyes glittered. Mother, seeing the danger signs, rushed in quickly before he could reply. Yes, yes, he writes away day after day, always tapping at the typewriter. I always feel that I could write superbly if I tried, remarked the Turk. Really?
Hi, hi.
Yes, well, it's a gift, I suppose, like so many things. He swims well, remarked Margot, and he goes out terribly far. I have no fear, said the Turk modestly. I am a superb swimmer, so I have no fear. When I ride the horse, I have no fear, for I ride superbly. I can sail the boat.
I want to have my dinner. Oh, bon appetit!
Without fear.
Have fun.
Regarding our awestruck faces.
Time is
You see,
5 p.m.
in case we missed the point. You see, I am not a fearful man. The result of the tea party was that the next day, Margot received a note from the Turk, asking her if she would
I
come
didn't
with
have
us to
my
the
dinner
cinema
too
that evening.
yet.
Do you think I ought to go? She asked.
Maybe later.
If you want to, dear, Mother answered, adding firmly, but tell him I'm coming too. That should be a jolly evening for you, remarked Larry. Mother, you can't.
Thank you. Thank you,
I think
Maggie.
it's so strange. Nonsense, dear, said Mother vaguely. Turks are quite used to chaperones and things. Look at their harems. So that evening, Mother and Margot, dressed becomingly, made
It's
their
so
way
calming.
down the hill to meet the Turk. The only cinema was an open-air one in the town, and we calculated that the show should be over by 10 at the latest. Larry, Leslie and I waited eagerly for their return. At 1:30
Oh,
in the
it's
morning,
almost
Margot and
10.
Mother, in the
I
last
see.
stages of exhaustion, crept into the villa and sank into chairs.
Almost night.
Oh, so you've come back, said Larry. We
Not
thought you'd
smoke.
flown with it. We imagined
I
you
can't
galloping
quit.
about Constantinople in
At least for
camels,
now.
yashmaks, twinklings, and
At least I'm not smoking tobacco.
We've had the most awful
I hope you
evening,
proud of me.
eating her shoes off. Really awful. What happened? Asked Desmond. Well, to begin with,
At
he
least
stank
I'm
of the most
proud of
frightful
me.
perfume, said Margot, and that put me off right away. We went in the
I
cheapest
don't
seats, so
really
close to the screen that I got
huge fan of tea.
and simply
I prefer
crammed
coffee.
together like sardines.
But now I have
So
energy
I
drink.
couldn't breathe.
It's good.
And then, to
too.
crown it all, I got a flu. It was nothing to laugh at, Larry. Really, I didn't know what to do. The blessed thing got inside my corsets and I could feel it running about. I couldn't very well scratch. It would have looked so peculiar. I had to keep pressing myself against the seat. I think he noticed, though. He kept giving me funny looks from the corner of his eye. Then in the interval, he went out and came back with some of that horrible, sickly Turkish delight. And before long, we were all covered with white sugar and I had a dreadful thirst. In the second interval, he went out and came back with flowers. I ask you, dear, flowers in the middle of the cinema. That's Margot's bouquet on the table. Mother pointed to a massive bunch of spring flowers tied up with a tangle of coloured ribbons. She delved into her bag and produced a bunch of violets that looked as though they'd been trodden on by an exceptionally large horse. This, she wailed, was for me. But the worst part was coming home, said Margot. A dreadful journey. When we came out of the cinema, I thought we were going to get a car. But no, he hustled us into a cab, and a very smelly one at that. Really, he must be mental to try and come with a cab. Anyway, it took
Shall we
us
do a
hours
business?
because the poor horse was tired.
What kind of business?
Trying to be polite, dying to scratch myself and longing for a drink. All the fool could do was sit there grinning at Margot and singing Turkish love songs. I could have cheerfully hit him. I thought we were never going to get back. We couldn't even get rid of him at the bottom of the hill. He insisted on coming up with us, armed with a huge stick, because he said the forests were full of serpents at this time of the year. I was so glad to see him back. I'm afraid you'll have to choose your
I
boyfriend
think I,
more carefully,
I can buy it.
Terrified to come right up to the door and we'd have to ask him in. I thought we'd never get away.
I don't know.
You obviously didn't
I
make yourself
think
fearful
it's-
enough, said Larry. For Leslie, the coming of spring meant the soft pipe of wings as the turtle doves and wood pigeons arrived.
Too hard
And
to
the sudden flash
doing
and
business
scuffle of hair among the myrtles.
on just
So, after visiting
tea.
numerous gun shops and after much technical argument,
coconut water need to be preserved.
Double-barreled shotgun. His first action
I
was to take
think.
it to his room, strip it down, and clean it, while I stood and watched, fascinated by the gleaming barrels and stock, sniffing
If you
rapidly
have
the rich
buyers
scent of
here,
gunpowder. Isn't she a
it's okay.
he crooned more to himself than to me, his vivid blue eyes shining. Isn't she a honey? Tenderly he ran his hand
But
over
I
the
don't
silver
understand
Then he whipped it suddenly to his shoulder.
who I can,
and followed
no,
an
who we
imaginary
can
flock
sell
of
it
birds across the
to
ceiling.
whom.
Pow! Pow! He intoned, jerking the gun against
We
his
need to
shoulder.
find
A left
buyers
and a right,
first.
Down they come. He gave the gun a final rub with the oily rag and set it carefully in the corner of the room. We'll have a try
I don't
some
have
turkey
buyers,
tomorrow
so
evening, he continued.
I can sell it.
To
To sell someone, first you need to find someone who need to
That
sell
little
it,
hill across the valley is a good place.
who need to
So
buy
at
it.
dawn, he and I hurried through the hunched and misty
I don't
woods,
have buyers.
up the valley where the myrtles were wet and squeaking with dew, and onto the top of the little hill. We stood waist deep among the vines, waiting for the light to strengthen.
And finding buyers, it's more
Suddenly,
more
pale morning sky was flecked with
like
dark
hard,
and moving as swiftly
thing.
as arrows.
such
We could hear
a
the quick whip of wings.
huge pain.
Leslie waited, standing stockily with legs park, gun stock resting on his hip, his eyes intense and gleaming.
Some customers. You think it's so easy?
Until it seemed that they must fly past us and be lost in the silvery, trembling olive tops behind. At the very last moment,
I don't think it's interesting way to
beetle shiny barrels
have a
lifted their
business.
mouths to the sky. The gun jerked as the report
Sorry.
echoed briefly, like the crack of a great branch in the still.
Finding customers, it's
Turtle dove, 1 minute so swift and intent in its
a
flight,
huge
now fell
pain
like
ass.
a swirl, followed by a swirl of soft cinnamon-colored feathers. When 5 doves hung from his belt, limp, blood-stained, with demurely closed eyes, he lit a cigarette, pulled his hat brim down over his eyes, and cuddled the gun under his arm. "Come on," he said. "We've got enough.
I
Let's
can
give the
send
poor devils a
you
rest." We returned through the sun-striped olive groves, where the chaffinches were clinking like 100 tiny coins among
my pets.
Yanni the
Find the
shepherd was driving
customers.
a herd of goats out to graze. His brown face,
I can send
with its
you
great sweep of nicotine
Tenebrio
stained
molitor.
moustache, wrinkled into a smile. A gnarled hand appeared from the heavy folds of his sheepskin coat.
Zophobos morio, few
The goats
types of
poured into the
roaches.
yard, uttering stammering cries to each other. The leader's
Find the
bell
customers.
thundered with them. Chaffinches tinkled excitedly. Robin
Kotu.
puffed out his chest like a
Never
chaffinch.
heard about it. It will be hard to sell something who never heard about it.
How could one be anything but happy in such a
They
season?
don't used to it.
As soon as we had settled down and started to enjoy the island, Larry, with characteristic generosity,
No, I never tried
wrote
it.
to all
Never
his
heard
friends
about
and
it.
asked them to come and stay. The fact that the
What
villa
is
was
this?
only just big enough to house the family apparently had not occurred to him. "I've asked a few people out for a week or so," he said casually to Mother one morning. "That would be nice, dear," said Mother unthinkingly. "I thought it would do us good to have some intelligent and stimulating company around. We don't want to stagnate. I hope they're not too highbrow, dear," said Mother. "Good Lord, Mother, of course they're not. Just extremely charming, ordinary people. I don't know why you've got this phobia about people being highbrow." "I don't like the highbrow ones," said Mother plaintively. "I'm not highbrow, and I can't talk about poetry and things. But they always seem to imagine, just because I'm your mother, that I should be able to discuss literature at great length with them. They always come and ask me silly questions just when I'm in the middle of cooking." "I don't ask you to discuss art with them," said Larry protesting. "But I think you might try and conceal your revolting taste in literature. Here I fill the house with good books, and I find your bedside table simply groaning under the weight of cookery books, gardening books, and the most lurid-looking mystery stories. I can't think where you get hold of these things." "They're very good detective stories," said Mother defensively. "I borrowed them from Theodore." Larry gave a short, exasperated sigh and picked up his book again. "You'd better let the Pension Suisse know when they're coming."
I think a song.
"What for?" asked Larry, surprised.
You can? Why
"So they
not?
can reserve the rooms," said Mother, equally surprised. "But I've invited them to stay here," Larry pointed out. "Larry, you haven't. Really, you are most thoughtless. How can they possibly stay here?" "I really don't see what you're making a fuss about," said Larry. "But where are they going to sleep?" said Mother, distraught. "There's hardly enough room for us as it is." "Nonsense, Mother. There's plenty of room if the place is organised properly. If Margot and Les sleep out on the veranda, that gives you 2 rooms. You and Jerry can move into the drawing room, and that would leave those rooms free. Don't be silly, dear. We can't all camp out all over the place like gypsies. Besides, it's still chilly at night, and I don't think Margot and Les ought to sleep outside. There simply isn't enough room to entertain in this villa. You'll just have to write to these people and put them off." "I can't put them off," said Larry. "They're on their way." "Really, Larry, you are the most annoying creature. Why on earth didn't you tell me before? You wait until they're nearly here and then you tell me? Why, I didn't know you were going to treat the arrival of a few friends as if it was a major catastrophe." "But dear, it's so silly to invite people when you know there's no room in the villa." "I do wish you'd stop fussing," said Larry irritably. "There's quite a simple solution to the whole business." "What?" asked Mother suspiciously. "Well, since the villa isn't big enough, let's move to one that is." "Don't be ridiculous. Whoever heard of moving into a larger house because you've invited some friends to stay? What's the matter with the idea? It seems a perfectly sensible solution to me. After all, if you say there's no room here, the obvious thing to do is to move. The obvious thing to do is not to invite people, said Mother severely. I don't think it's good for us to live like hermits, said Larry. I only really invited them for you. They're a charming crowd. I thought you'd like to have them. Liven things up a bit for you. I'm quite lively enough, thank you, said Mother with dignity. Well, I don't know what we're going to do. I really don't see why they can't stay in the pension suites, dear. You can't ask people out to stay with you and then make them live in a third-rate hotel. But Larry, dear, do be reasonable. We can't just rush to a new villa because some people are coming. I doubt whether we'd find one in time anyway. And there's Jerry's lessons. All that could easily be sorted out if you put your mind to it. We are not moving to another villa, said Mother firmly. I've made up my mind about that. She straightened her spectacles, gave Larry a defiant glare, and strutted off towards the kitchen, registering determination in every inch. The new daffodil yellow villa was an enormous, tall, square Venetian mansion with faded yellow walls, green shutters, and a fox-red roof. It stood on a hill overlooking the sea, surrounded by unkempt olive groves and silent orchards of lemon and orange trees. The whole place had an atmosphere of ancient melancholy about it. The house, with its cracked and peeling walls, its tremendous echoing rooms, its verandas piled high with drifts of last year's leaves, and so overgrown with creepers and vines that the lower rooms were in perpetual green twilight. The little walled and sunken garden that ran along one side of the house, its wrought iron gates scabby with rust and
Hi, Shadowix.
geraniums
How are you?
across the weed-grown paths. And the shaggy, untended tangerine trees were so thick with flowers that the scent was almost overpowering. Beyond the garden, the orchards were still and silent, except for the hum of bees.
I'm great
and the
too.
occasional splutter of birds among the leaves.
Thanks for
The
asking.
house and land were gently, sadly
Just
decaying,
spending my time with
lying forgotten on
painting
the hillside overlooking the shining
this
sea
evening.
and the dark, eroded hills of Albania. It was as though villa and landscape were half asleep, lying there drugged in the spring sunshine, giving themselves up to the moss, ferns, and the crowds of tiny toadstools. It was Spiro, of course, who had found the place, and who organized our move with the minimum fuss and the maximum of efficiency. Larry took possession of one enormous attic and engaged 2 carpenters to make bookshelves.
Some of
Leslie
my arts.
converted the large covered
I'm
veranda
not
behind
actually
the house into a
artist.
shooting gallery.
It's just
Hung
painting
an
by
enormous
numbers.
red flag up outside whenever he was practicing.
But as you can see, this one, for example, it was my first one.
Subterranean and stone-flagged kitchen,
That's what I
bearing
have
gallons of beef
here.
tea, and worried about Margot, who had caught influenza at the same time. Roger and myself
Maybe soon I will finish
had
this
15
one
acres
too.
of garden to explore. A vast new paradise sloping down to the shallow, tepid sea. Being temporarily without a tutor, for George had left
No, it's not a talent,
spend
it's
the
just
whole day out, only returning to the
patience.
hurried meals. In this varied terrain, so
Time
close
and
at hand,
patience.
I found many creatures which I now regarded as old friends. The rose beetles, the blue
It's not
carpenter
painting
beetles,
like
the
painting,
ladybirds,
it's just coloring.
but I also discovered many new pieces to occupy me.
Much easier stuff.
Lived dozens of little black scorpions, shining and polished as if they'd been made out of bacon. In the fig and lemon trees just below the garden, quantities of emerald green frogs, like delicious satiny sweets among the leaves. Up on the hillside lived snakes of various sorts, brilliant lizards and tortoises. In the fruit orchards, there were many
Thank you
kinds
for
of
follow.
birds, goldfinches, greenfinches,
I'm native to Ukrainian and Russian languages. Now I learn in English, as you can hear.
Erecting their crests in astonishment when they saw me flying off. Under the eaves of the villa itself, the swallows had taken up their
English it's my
They had
third
arrived a short
language.
time before we had, and their knobbly mud houses were only just completed, still dark brown and damp like rich plum cake.
What
As
about
these
you?
were drying to a lighter biscuit brown, the parent birds were busy lining them, foraging round the garden for rootlets, landswood, or feathers. 2 of the swallows' nests were lower than the others, and it was on these that I concentrated my attention. Over a period of days, I leant a long ladder against the wall midway between the two nests, and then slowly, day by day, I climbed higher and higher until I could sit on the top rung and look into the nests, now some 4 feet away from me. The parent birds seemed in no way disturbed by my presence, and
Mine
continued
too,
their stern
mine
work
too.
preparing for a family,
As you
while
can
I
hear.
crouched on top of the ladder, and Roger lay at the bottom.
But streaming really helps
I
me
grew to know
with
the
my
swallow
English,
families very well,
because
and
now I
watched their
have
daily
everyday
work
practice.
with interest.
And small
What I
talks
took to be the two females were very similar in behaviour.
with people here.
Ernest rather preoccupied, over-anxious and fussy. The two males, on the other hand, displayed totally different.
It's Gerald Darrell
One of them,
book,
during the work of
audiobook.
lining the nest, brought
My
excellent
family
material,
as
but he
other
refused to treat
animals.
it as a job of work.
It's
He would
old,
come
old book
swooping
from my
home,
childhood.
carrying a wisp of sheep's wool in his mouth.
I
And
love
he'd
it
waste
so much.
several minutes skating low over the flowers in the garden, drawing figures of 8, or else weaving in and out of the columns that held up the grapevine. His wife would cling to the nest and chitter at him exasperatedly, but he refused to take life seriously. The other female also had trouble with her mate, but it was trouble of a different sort. He was, if anything, over-enthusiastic. He seemed determined to leave no stone unturned in his efforts to provide his young with the finest nest lining in the colony. But unfortunately, he was no mathematician, and try as he would, he could not remember the size of his nest.
No,
He would
now,
come flying
now
back
because
to
of war in my
Switzerland
country,
the
now I
sight of
live
some
in
muffled
Ireland,
duck carrying a
Dublin.
chicken or turkey feather as big as himself. And with such a thick
In
quill,
Ukraine,
impossible to
now
bend.
it's not
It would generally take his wife several
safe
minutes
place to live.
convince him that no matter how they struggled and juggled, the feather would not fit into the nest. Acutely disappointed, he would eventually drop the feather so that it whirlpooled down to join the ever-increasing pile on the ground beneath, and then fly off in search of something more suitable. In a little while, he would be back, struggling under a load of sheep's wool, so matted and hard with earth and dung that he would have difficulty in getting up to the eaves, let alone into the nest. When at last the nests were lined, the freckled eggs laid and hatched, the two husbands' characters seemed to change. The one who had brought so much futile nest lining swooped and hawked about the hillsides in a carefree manner and would come drifting back carelessly, carrying a mouthful of insect life of just the right size and softness. Fuzzy.
For now, I'm just housewife,
The other male now became
because
terribly
I can't work here.
apparently
I don't
afraid
have a
of the
license
dreadful
for
thought
work.
that his babies might starve. So he would wear
I'm
himself to a shadow
veterinarian,
suit of food,
animal
and
doctor.
return carrying the most unsuitable items, such as
I worked
hard,
before
spiky
at
beetles,
zoos and
legs
all
of
this stuff.
wingfish, and immense
But
dry,
now
completely
I live in
indigestible
Ireland.
dragonflies.
And I don't
He would
have
cling to the edge
license
of the
for
nest
work,
and
so
make valiant but vain attempts to get these
I'm just sitting at
gigantic
home
offerings
now.
rammed down the ever-open gullet of his young. I dread to think what would have happened.
My dad has passed.
Captures down their throats. Luckily, however,
My mother is
he never
here in
succeeded.
Ireland too.
And eventually, looking more harassed than ever, he would drop the insect onto the ground and fly off hurriedly in search of something else.
Something
I
like
was very grateful to the swallow.
I'm not
Provided me
actually
with 3 species of
manage it.
butterflies, 6 dragonflies, and 2 antlions, which were new to my collection. The females, once the young were hatched, behaved in much the same way as they had always done. They flew a little faster. There was
I
an
don't
air of
have,
brisk efficiency about them, but that was
like
it intrigued me to see for the first
income
time the
at all.
hygienic arrangements of a bird's nest. I had often wondered when
Yeah,
Anne
this
was
is
young,
a
why it hoisted
horse.
its bottom skyward with much ragged.
At least it will be a horse. Let me show you.
Now I discovered the reason. The excreta of the baby swallows
I think
was produced
it
in
will be
globules, which were coated with
beautiful.
mucus that formed what was almost a gelatin package around the dropping. The young would
But
stand
it's
on
a
their
lot
heads,
of
waggle
work,
their bottoms
actually.
with a brief but enthusiastic rumba, and deposit their little offerings on the rim of the nest. When the females arrived, they would cram the food they had collected down the gaping throats, and then delicately pick up the dropping in their beaks and fly off to deposit it somewhere over the olive groves. It was an admirable arrangement. I would watch the whole performance fascinated, from the bottom waggle, which always made me giggle, to the final swoop of the parent over the treetop and the dropping of the little black and white bomb earthwards. Owing to the male swallow's habit of collecting strange and unsuitable insects for his young, I always used to examine the area below the nest twice a day in the hope of finding new specimens to add to my collection. It was here that one morning I found the most extraordinary looking beetle crawling about. I did not think that even that mentally defective swallow could have brought back such a large creature, or even that he could have caught it, but it was certainly there, underneath the
Yeah.
collar. It was a large, clumsy, blue-black beetle, with a large round head, long jointed antennae, and a bulbous body. The weird thing about it was its wing cases. It looked as though it had sent them to the laundry, and they had shrunk, but they were very small, and appeared to have been
Yeah.
constructed for a beetle half the size.
A lot of
Toyed
my
with the
friends,
idea that it may have found itself
my
without a pair of
neighbors,
clean wing cases to put on,
schoolmates.
and had to
I'm
borrow
from
his younger
Kharkiv, you
brother's
know,
pair.
it's
But
touching
I
us
eventually
a
decided
lot.
that this idea, however enchanting,
I lost my
was
house
quite
at least.
sight. I noticed, after I had picked it up, that my fingers smelled faintly acrid and oily,
It's hard
though it
time.
appeared not to have exuded any liquid that I could see. I gave it to Roger to smell, to see if he agreed with me, and he sneezed violently and backed away. So I concluded that it must be the beetle
Trying
that
to
had knocked my hand.
used to it
I preserved it
and
carefully
not.
so that Theodore could identify it when he came. Now the warm days of spring had arrived. Theodore would come out to the villa every
Yeah,
Thursday for tea,
it's hard to
arriving in a horse-drawn cab
express
from town, in his
the
immaculate suit, stiff collar, and Homburg hat, making a strange contrast to the nets, bags, and boxes full of test tubes with which he was surrounded. Before tea, we would examine any new specimen
I'm from India.
and identify them.
Oh, good to know.
After tea, we would wander about the grounds
see.
in search of creatures, or else make what Theodore would call an excursion to some neighboring
It's so
pond
far
in
away.
search of new microscopic life in Theodore's collection. He identified my strange beetle with its ill-fitting electra without much trouble, and proceeded to tell me some extraordinary things about it. Aha! Yes, he said, closely scrutinizing the beast. It's an oil beetle, Meloproscarabeus. Yes, they are certainly very curious looking beetles. What do you say? Yes, the wing cases. Well, you see, they are flightless. There are several species of Coleoptera that have lost the power of flight for one reason or another. It is the life history of this beetle that is curious. This, of course, is a female. The male is considerably smaller. I should say approximately half the size. It appears that the female lays a number of small yellow eggs in the oil. When these hatch out into larvae, they climb
If I
up
will
into
not
the
forget,
boughs nearby and wait
I will
inside the
post it
flowers.
in my server.
There is a certain type of solitary bee which they must wait for. When it enters the flower, the larvae hitchhike. Get a good
I will
feel
not
of their
at
claws
you
on the
if you
bee's fur. If
trying
they are
to
lucky, the bee
catch
is a
me.
female who is collecting honey to put in the cells with her egg. Then, as soon as the bee has completed the filling of the cell and lays her egg, the larva jumps off onto the egg and the bee closes the cell. Then the larva eats the egg and develops inside the cell. The thing that always strikes me as curious is that there is only one species of bee that the larvae prey on. I should have thought that a great many of the larvae catch hold of the wrong species of bee and so eventually die. Then, of course, even if it's the right kind of bee, there is no guarantee that it's a female about to lay eggs. He paused for a moment, raised himself on his toes several times, and thoughtfully contemplated the floor. Then he looked up, his eyes twinkling. I need to say, it's rather
It's
like betting
5:30
a horse in a race with the odds
p.m.
heavily stacked against you.
here.
He waggled the glass-topped box gently, so that the beetle slid from one end to the other, waving its
Actually,
antennae in surprise.
Still didn't have my dinner today. Maybe later.
Behind the village, there was a series of small hills that raised shaggy crests above the surrounding olive groves. They were hills covered with great beds of green myrtle, tall heather, and a patchy feathering of cypress trees. This was probably the most fascinating area of the whole garden, for it was overflowing with life. In the sandy paths, the antlion larvae dug their little cone-shaped pits and lay in wait to scatter any
showed you
unwary ant that stepped over the edge.
Is this
a
one?
bombardment of sand.
You can see it.
Send it tumbling down to the bottom of the trap, to be seized in the antlion larva's terrible insolent jaws. In the red sandbanks, the hunting
You can
wolves
see it.
were digging their tunnels and hawking low.
It's my first one. I have
their sting,
some
paralyzing
more,
them
but
and carrying them off to serve as food for their larvae. Among the heather blooms,
it's not
the great
available
fat,
right now.
furry caterpillars of emperor moths fed slowly, looking like animated fur collars. Among the myrtles in the warm, scented twilight of their leaves, the mantlets prowled, heads turning this way and that as they watched for prey. Among the cypress branches, the chaffinches had their neat nests, full of gawping, goggle-eyed babies, and on the lower branches, the goldcrests weaved their tiny, fragile cups of moss and hair, or foraged for insects, hanging upside down on the ends of the branches, giving almost inaudible squeaks of joy at the discovery of a tiny spider or a gnat, their golden crests gleaming like little forage caps.
Bye, see ya.
Through the gloom of the tree.
It was nice to chat with
It
you.
was not long after we arrived at the villa that I discovered that these hills really belonged to the tortoises. One hot afternoon, Roger and I were concealed behind a bush, waiting patiently for a large swallowtail butterfly to return to its favourite sunning patch so that we might capture it. It was the first really hot day we had had that year, and everything seemed to be lying drugged in the sleep, soaking up the sun. The swallowtail was in no hurry. He was down by the olive groves doing a ballet dance by himself, twisting, diving, pirouetting in the sun. As we watched him, I saw, in the corner of my eye, a faint movement at one side
This
of the
one,
bush.
small one.
I glanced quickly to see what it was, but the brown earth was sun-drenched and empty of life. I was just about to turn my attention to the butterfly when I saw something
This
red
one.
hard.
A bit larger.
The patch of earth I had been looking at suddenly heaved upwards, as though pushed by a hand from underneath. The soil cracked, and a tiny seedling waved about wildly before its pale roots gave way and it fell on its side. What, I wondered, could be the cause of this sudden eruption? An earthquake? Surely not so small and confined. A mole? Not in such dry and waterless terrain. As I was speculating, the earth gave another heave, clods of it cracked off and rolled away, and I was looking at a brown yellow shell. More earth was swept out of the way as the shell bucked upwards, and then, slowly and cautiously, a wrinkled, scaly head appeared out of the hole. A long, skinny neck followed it. The bleary eyes blinked once or twice as the tortoise surveyed him. Then, deciding I must be harmless, he hoisted himself with infinite care and effort out of his earth cell, walked 2 or 3 steps, and sunk down in the sunshine, drowsing gently. After the long winter under the damp and chilly soil, that first sunbath must have been like a drink of wine for the time. His legs were spread out from his shell, his neck extended as far as it could, his head resting on the ground. With eyes closed, the creature seemed to be absorbing
Okay, I think
sunshine
it's
through
time
every
for
bit of his
6.
body and shell. He remained lying there for about 10 minutes, and then he rose, slowly and deliberately, and rolled off down the path to where a patch of dandelion and clover spread in the shade of the cypress. Here, his legs seemed to give way, and he collapsed onto the bottom of his shell with a thump. Then his head appeared from his shell, bent slowly down towards the rich green pile of the clover patch. His mouth opened wide, there was a moment's suspense, and then his mouth closed round the succulent leaves, and he sat there munching happily, his mouth stained with the first food of the year. This must have been the first tortoise of spring, and as if his appearance from the subterranean dormitory was a signal, the hills suddenly became covered with tortoises. I have never seen so many congregated in so small an area. Big ones the size of a soup plate, and little ones the size of a cup. Chocolate-coloured great-grandfathers and pale, horn-coloured youngsters, all lumbering heavily along the sandy paths, in and out of the heather and myrtles, occasionally descending to the olive groves where the vegetation was more succulent. Sitting in one spot for an hour or so, you could count as many as 10 tortoises passing. And on one afternoon, as an experiment, I collected 35 specimens in 2 hours, just walking about the hillside, picking them up as they wandered about with an air of preoccupied determination, their club feet thumping on the ground. No sooner had the shelled owners of the hills appeared from their winter quarters and had their first meal, than the males became romantically inclined. Stalking along on tiptoe with stumbling rapidity, their necks stretched out to the fullest extent, they would set out in search of a mate, pausing now and then to give a strange, yawping cry, the passionate love song of a male tortoise. The females, ambling heavily through the heather and pausing now and then for a snack, would answer in an offhand manner. 2 or 3 males, travelling at what, for a tortoise, was a gallop, would generally converge on the same female. They would arrive, out of breath and inflamed with passion, and glare at each other, their throats gulping convulsively. Then they would prepare to do battle. These battles were exciting and interesting to watch, resembling all-in wrestling more than boxing, for the combatants did not possess either speed or the physical grace to indulge in fancy footwork. The general idea was for one to charge his rival as rapidly as possible, and just before impact, to duck his head into his shell. The best blow was considered to be the broadside, for this gave the opportunity, by wedging yourself against your rival's shell and pushing hard, of overturning him, leaving him flapping helplessly on his back. If they couldn't manage to get in a broadside, any other part of the rival's anatomy did just as well. Charging each other, straining and pushing, their shells clattering together, occasionally taking a slow-motion bite at each other's necks or retreating with a hiss, males would do battle. Meanwhile, the object of their frenzy would amble slowly onwards, pausing now and then for a bite to eat, apparently unconcerned by the scraping and cracking of shells behind her. On more than one occasion, these battles became so furious that a male, in a fit of misplaced enthusiasm, would deliver a broadside to his ladylove by mistake. She would merely fold herself into her shell with an outraged sniff and wait patiently until the battle had passed her by. These fights seemed to me the most ill-organized and unnecessary affairs, for it was not always the strongest tortoise that won. With good terrain in his favor, a small specimen could easily overturn one twice his size. Nor indeed was it invariably one of the warriors that got the lady, for on several occasions I saw a female wander away from a pair of fighting males to be accosted by a complete stranger who had not even chipped his shell on her behalf, and go off with him quite happily. Roger and I would squat by the hour in the heather, watching the tortoise knights in their ill-fitting armour jousting for the ladies, and the contests never failed to entertain us. Sometimes we would lay bets with each other as to which one was going to win, and by the end of the summer, Roger had backed so many losers that he owed me a considerable amount of money. When the lady had eventually made her choice, we would follow the happy couple on their honeymoon among the myrtles, and even watch, discreetly hidden behind the bushes, the final acts in the romantic drama. The wedding night, or rather day, of a tortoise is not exactly inspiring. To begin with, the female performs in a disgracefully coy manner, irritating him until he is forced to adopt caveman tactics, and subdues her mate in the antics with a few short, sharp broadsides. The actual sexual act was the most awkward and fumbling thing I had ever seen. The incredibly heavy-handed and inexpert way the male would attempt to hoist himself onto the female's shell, slipping and slithering, clawing desperately for a foothold on the shiny shields, overbalancing and almost overturning, was extremely painful to watch. The urge to go and assist the poor creature was almost overwhelming, and I had the greatest difficulty in restraining myself from interference. Once, a male was infinitely more bungling than usual, and fell down 3 times during the bouncing, and generally behaved in such an imbecile manner I was beginning to wonder if we were going to take all summer about it. At last, more than my luck and skill, he hoisted himself up, and I was just heaving a sigh of relief when the female, obviously bored by the male's inadequacy, moved a few steps towards a dandelion leaf. Her husband clawed wildly at her moving shell, but could get no foothold. He slipped off, teetered for a minute, and then rolled ignominiously over onto his back. This final blow seemed to be too much for him, because instead of trying to right himself, he simply folded himself up in his shell and lay there mournfully. The female, meanwhile, ate the dandelion leaf. At last, since his passion seemed to have died, I rolled the male over, and after a minute or so he wandered off, peering about him in a dazed fashion and ignoring his erstwhile bride, who regarded him unemotionally, her mouth full of food. As a punishment for her callous behaviour, I carried her up to the most barren and desiccated part of the hillside and left her there, so that she would have an extremely long walk back to the nearest clover patch. I came to know many of the tortoises by sight, so closely and enthusiastically that I watched their daily lives. Some I could recognize by their shape and color, others by some physical defect, a chip from the edge of their shells, loss of a toenail, and so on. There was one large honey and tar-colored female who was unmistakable, for she had only one eye. I got on such intimate terms with her that I christened her Madame Cyclops. She came to know me quite well, and realizing that I meant her no harm, she would not disappear into her shell at my approach, but stretch up her neck to see if I had brought her a tidbit in the shape of a lettuce leaf or some tiny snails, of which she was inordinately fond. She would roll about her business quite happily, while Roger and I followed her. Occasionally, as a special treat, we would carry her down to the olive groves for a picnic lunch on the clover. To my infinite regret, I was not present at her wedding, but I was lucky enough to witness the outcome of the honeymoon. I found her one day busily engaged in digging a hole in the soft soil at the base of the bank. She had dug to a fair depth when I arrived, and seemed quite glad to have a rest and a little refreshment in the shape of some clover flowers. Then she set to work once more, scraping the earth out with her forefeet, barging it to one side with her shell. Not being quite certain what she was trying to achieve, I did not attempt to help her, but merely lay on my stomach in the level and watched. After some time, when she had excavated quite a pile of earth, she carefully scrutinized the hole from all angles and was apparently satisfied. She turned round, lowered her hind end over the hole, and sat there with a rapt look on her face, while she absent-mindedly laid 9 white eggs. I was most surprised and delighted, and congratulated her heartily on this achievement, while she gulped at me in a meditative sort of way. She then proceeded to scrape the soil back over the eggs and pat it down firmly by the simple method of standing over it and flopping down on her tummy several times. This task accomplished, she had a rest and accepted the remains of the clover leaves. I found myself in an awkward position, for I dearly wanted one of the eggs to add to my collection. I did not like to take it while she was there, for fear that she might feel insulted, and perhaps dig up the remaining eggs and eat them, or do something equally horrible. So I had to sit and wait patiently while she finished her snack, had a short doze, and then ambled off among the bushes. I followed her at some distance to make sure she did not turn back, and then hurried to the nest and carefully unearthed one of the eggs. It was about the size of a pigeon's, oval in shape and with a rough, chalky shell. I patted the earth back over the nest so that she would never know it had been disturbed, and carried my trophy triumphantly back to the door. I blew the sticky yolk out of it with great care, and enshrined the shell among my natural history collection in a small glass-topped box of its own. The label, which was a nice blend of scientific and sentimental, read, "Egg of Greek tortoise, Testudo graeca, laid by Madame Cyclops." Throughout the spring and early summer, while I was studying the courtship of tortoises, the villa was filled with an apparently endless stream of Larry's friends. No sooner had we seen one lot off and sighed with relief, than another steamer would arrive, and the line of taxis and horse carriages would hoot and clatter their way up the drive, and the house would be filled once more. Sometimes the fresh load of guests would turn up before we'd got rid of the previous group, and the chaos was indescribable. The house and garden would be dotted with poets, authors, artists, and playwrights, arguing, painting, drinking, typing, and composing. Far from being the ordinary, charming people Larry had promised, they all turned out to be the most extraordinary eccentrics, who were so highbrow that they had difficulty in understanding one another. One of the first to arrive was Zatopek, an Armenian poet, a short, stocky individual with a swooping eagle nose, a shoulder-length mane of silvery hair, and hands bulbous and twisted by arthritis. He arrived wearing an immense swirling black cloak and a broad-brimmed black hat, riding in a carriage piled high with wine. His voice shook the house like a scirocco as he swept into it, his cloak rippling, his arms full of bottles. He scarcely stopped talking the whole time he stayed. He talked from morning till night, drinking prodigious quantities of wine, snatching 40 winks wherever he happened to be, and rarely going to bed at all. In spite of his advanced years, he had lost none of his enthusiasm for the opposite sex. And while he treated Mother and Margot with a sort of creaking antique courtesy, no peasant girl for miles was free from his attentions. He would hobble through the olive groves after them, roaring with laughter,
What a
shouting endearments,
Kyle.
his cloak flapping behind him, his pocket bulging with a bottle of wine. Eventually, Zatopek departed as he had arrived.
Hi
Lying back regally in
again.
the cab, his cloak wrapped round him, shouting endearments to us as he clocked off down the drive,
Congrats.
promising to
With-
return soon from Bosnia and bring some more wine.
What about your
Then
falcon?
another guest arrived, in the shape of Melanie, Countess de Toro. She was tall, thin, with a face like an ancient horse, crow-black eyebrows, and an enormous cushion of scarlet hair on her head. She had hardly been in the house
What
5
you
minutes
mean?
before she complained of the heat. And to Mother's consternation and my delight, she caught hold of her scarlet hair and removed it, revealing a head as bald as a mushroom top. Seeing Mother's startled gaze, the Countess explained in her harsh, croaking voice, "I've just recovered from erysipelas," she said. "Lost all my hair. Couldn't find eyebrows and wig to match in Milan. Might get something in Athens." It was unfortunate that, owing to a slight impediment due to ill-fitting false teeth, the Countess was inclined to mumble. So Mother was under the impression that the disease she had just recovered from was of a much more unladylike character. At the first available opportunity, she got Larry into a corner. "Disgusting," she said in a vibrant whisper. "Did you hear what she's had? And you call her a friend?" "Friend?" said Larry in surprise. "Why, I hardly know her. Can't stand the woman. But she's an interesting character, and I wanted to study her close at hand." "I like that," said Mother indignantly. "So you invite that creature here, and we all catch some revolting disease while you take notes? No, I'm sorry, Larry, but you'll have to go." "Don't be silly, Mother," said Larry irritably. "She can't catch it, not unless you intend to share a bed with her." "Don't be revolting," said Mother, glaring. "I won't stand that obscene person in this house." They argued in whispers for the rest of the day, but Mother was adamant. Eventually, Larry suggested asking Theodore out and getting his opinion on the matter, and to this Mother agreed. His reply, accepting the invitation, was brought by a carriage in which reclined the cloak-swathed form of Zatopek, who, it turned out, had drunk a farewell of prodigious size before food, got on the wrong boat, and ended up in Athens. As by then he had missed his appointment in Bosnia, he had philosophically boarded the next vessel back to Corfu, bringing with him several crates of wine once again. Theodore turned up the next day, wearing, as a concession to summer, a Panama instead of his usual Homburg. Before Mother had a chance to warn him about our hairless guest, Larry had introduced them. "Doctor," said Melanie, Countess de Toro, her eyes gleaming. "How interesting. Maybe you can advise me. I've just had erysipelas." "Aha, really?" said Theodore, eyeing her keenly. "Which treatment did you have?" They embarked on a long and technical discussion with enthusiasm, and it was only the most determined efforts on Mother's part that got them away from what she considered to be an indelicate subject. "Really, Theodore's as bad as that woman," she said to Larry. "I do try to be broad-minded, but there is a limit, and I don't think things like that should be discussed at tea." Later, Mother got Theodore alone, and the subject of the Countess's disease was explained. Mother was then stricken with a guilty conscience at having misjudged the woman, and was immensely affable to her for the rest of the day, even telling her to take her wig off if she felt the heat. The dinner that night was colourful and extraordinary, and I was so fascinated by the assembly of characters and the various conversations that I did not know which one to listen to with undivided attention. The lamp smoked gently and cast a warm, honey-coloured light over the table, making the china and glass glitter and setting fire to the red wine as it splashed into the glasses. "But, dear boy, you have missed the meaning of it. Yes, you have." Zatopek's voice booming out, his nose curving over his wine glass. "You cannot discuss poetry as if it were house painting." The plates of food, piled like volcanoes, steaming gently, the early fruit in a polished pile in the center dish, Theodore's beard twinkling in the lamplight, Leslie carefully manufacturing bread pellets to shoot at a moth that hovered around the lamps, Mother ladling out the food, smiling vaguely at everyone. Under the table, Roger's cold nose pressed hard against my knee in mute appeal. Outside, The moon's face was peering through a filigree of vine leaves, and the owls were giving their strange, chiming cries. Coffee and wine were served on the balcony between the vine-shaggy pillars. Larry strummed on the guitar and sang an Elizabethan marching song. This reminded Theodore of one of his fantastic but true Corfu anecdotes, which he related to us with impish glee. As you know, here in Corfu, nothing is ever done the correct way. Everyone starts out with the best intentions, but something always seems to go wrong. When the Greek king visited the island some years ago, the climax of his tour was to be a sort of stage show, a play. The climax of the drama was the Battle of Thermopylae, and as the curtain fell, the Greek army was supposed to drive the Persian army triumphantly into the, what do you call them? Yes, the wings. Well, it appears that the people playing the part of the Persians were a bit disgruntled at the thought of having to retreat in front of the king. And the fact that they had to play the Persians also rankled. It only required a little incident to set things off. Unfortunately, during the battle scene, the leader of the Greek army misjudged the distance and caught the leader of the Persian army quite a heavy blow with his wooden sword. This, of course, was an accident. I mean to say, the poor fellow didn't mean to do it.
Can
But
see the
nevertheless,
chat.
it was sufficient to inflame
Some
the
guy.
Persian army to such an extent that instead of retreating, they advanced. The center of the stage
Let me
became a milling mob of helmeted soldiers locked in mortal combat. Two of them were thrown into the orchestra pit before someone had the sense to lower the curtain. The king remarked later that he had been greatly impressed by the realism shown in the battle scene. The burst of laughter sent the pale gecko scuttling up the room. Theodore, Larry laughed mockingly. I'm sure you made that up. No, Theodore would protest. It's quite true. I saw
Hi,
it myself.
Pikes.
It sounds the most
How are you?
Here in
I don't know what happens with
His eyes twinkling with pride.
chat.
Anything can happen. The sea striped with moonlight gleamed through the olives. Down by the well, the tree frogs
I don't know
croaked
what's
excitedly.
wrong,
Two owls were having a contest.
but something wrong.
Grapevine above our heads, the geckos crept along the gnarled branches, eagerly watching the drifts of insects drawn.
Actually, I don't. I can see you only here, only from Kick. Let's remove my. Maybe it will help. Oh, Kim, hi. How are you? Nice to see you. Somehow I got my new message from Twitch, but I didn't from Kick. Something wrong happens. Thank you, Pikes. Again, no sleep. What happens with you? Why are you not sleeping at all? Gonna be early night very soon for me. It's great, you need it. Totally. But you're not being cooperative. Actually, I understand you. The same with me. Sleep is so hard sometimes. Yeah, Botrix got the messages from Kik, but my app not. Let's start. Let's try. Where is my... I guess my romantic message is going late. While it's late, it's never can be late. It's okay. I mostly struggle because of the chronic pains. Only can pretend. No, actually, I can't pretend even, but I'm really sorry for it. Can you take some pills to have less pain? Maybe. I've always been like a child. Sounds terrible. I'm trying to sleep at least 7 hours. If I sleep 5, I'm nearly dying after. 8, it's perfect. 7, at least 7. Okay, agree with my body if I sleep at least 7. 3, 5, it's not possible. I will not like being alive next day. Now it's more like I go into a coma. 12 hours next day. Okay. Sounds not healthy at all, you know. Do not sleep one night, then second night sleep 12 hours. It's not good. It's not good at all. But I can understand. Sometimes we can do nothing with it. Will you cook today? Oh, it's too late. I think no. Maybe tomorrow morning I will cook. Today it's just painting. Trying to got my messages from Kik. You look like you're bored. No, I'm not. I'm just waited until my phone. Okay. Okay, let's wait a bit more. Hope I got my messages from Kik. Because I heard the sound of messages, but I didn't get it. Somebody. I wish I could sleep like normal person, 7-8 hours every night. I wish too, actually. Not every day I can do it. For example, yesterday I fell asleep like at 2 p.m. or so, and got up at 5. So thank you for follow, Salem. Thank you. Okay. Bikes, if you still here, can you write something? Okay, I have message from Silent. No, it's not. Hi, how are you, Seylan? Seylan, what's up? I don't know how I can proceed the stream because I don't have chat from Kik in my phone. I'll try use. Okay, let's try. Let's switch to DIY. Come. Let's try to use this chat.
It's that bloody boy again.
I'm fine, how are you? I'm great too. Just trying to painting, but something wrong with my chat from Kik.
Don't panic. Hit him with a book.
How's your day been so far? Everything is great, you know. Just
Bloody boy. He'll kill a lot of
don't have a lot of sleep today, but it's okay.
Stop screeching and get me a...
It's okay. Hi Moss, how are you? Thank you. God loves you too. Let's try to use this chat. I hope it will work at least. Okay. So it's the large one here. Okay, it's really large. Where is it starting? Somewhere here, I believe. Okay, let's start with it.
book or something, said Leslie. But how did the scorpions get on the table, dear? Asked Mother. That bloody boy! Every matchbox in the house is a death trap. By the time a certain amount of order was fulfilled, all the scorpions had hidden themselves under various plates of bits of plastic. Eventually, after impassioned pleas on my part, I fought off Leslie's suggestion that the whole lot be slaughtered and squashed. While the family, still simmering with rage and fright, retired to the drawing room, I spent half an hour rounding up the babies, picking them up in a teaspoon, and returning them to their mother's back. Then I carried them outside on a saucer, and, with the utmost reluctance, released them on the garden. Roger and I went and spent the afternoon on the hillside, for I felt it would be prudent to allow the family to have a siesta before seeing them again. The results of this incident were numerous. Larry developed a phobia about matchboxes and opened them with the utmost caution, a handkerchief wrapped around his hand. But from my point of view, the worst repercussion of the whole affair was that Mother decided I was running wild again, and that it was high time I received a little more education. With the summer came Peter to tutor me, a tall, handsome young man fresh from Oxford, with decided ideas on education which I found rather trying to implement. But gradually the atmosphere of the island worked its way insidiously under his skin. He relaxed and became quite human. At first the lessons were painful in the extreme. Interminable wrestling with fractions and percentages, geographical strata and warm currents, nouns, verbs and adverbs. But as the sunshine worked its magic on Peter, the fractions and percentages no longer seemed to him an overwhelmingly important part of life. They were gradually pushed more and more into the background. He discovered that the intricacies of geological strata and the effects of warm currents could be explained much more easily while swimming along the coast, while the simplest way of teaching me English was to allow me to write something each day which he would correct. He had suggested a diary, but I was against this, pointing out that I already kept one on nature, in which was recorded everything of interest that happened each day. If I were to keep another diary, what was I to put in it? Peter could find no answer to this argument. I suggested that I might try something a little more ambitious and interesting than a diary. Diffidently, I suggested I wrote a book, and Peter, somewhat startled, but not being able to think of any reason why I should not write a book, agreed. So every morning I spent a happy hour or so adding another chapter to my epic, a stirring tale which involved a voyage round the world of the family, during which we captured every conceivable kind of fauna in the most unlikely tramps. I modelled my style on a boy's own paper, and so each chapter ended on a thrilling note, with Mother being attacked by a jaguar, or Larry struggling in the coils of an enormous python. Sometimes these climaxes were so complicated and fraught with danger that I had great difficulty in extricating the family intact on the following day. While I was at work on my masterpiece, breathing heavily, tongue protruding, breaking off the discussions with Roger on the finer points of the plot, Peter and Margot would take a stroll in the sunken garden to look at the flowers. To my surprise, they had both suddenly become very botanically minded. In this way, the mornings passed very pleasantly for all concerned. Occasionally, in the early days, Peter suffered from sudden spasms of conscience. My epic would be relegated to a drawer, and we would pore over mathematical problems. But as the summer days grew longer, and Margot's interest in gardening became more sustained, these irritating periods became less frequent. After the unfortunate affair with the scorpion, the family had given me a large room on the first floor in which to house my beasts, in the vague hope that this would confine them to one particular portion of the house. This room, which I called my study and the rest of the family called the bug house, smelt pleasantly of ether and methylated spirits. It was here that I kept my natural history books, my diary, microscope, dissecting instruments, nets, collecting bags, and other important items. Large cardboard boxes housed my bird's egg, beetle, butterfly, and dragonfly collections, while on the shelves above were a fine range of bottles full of methylated spirits, in which were preserved such interesting items as a four-legged chicken, various lizards and snakes, frog spawn in different stages of growth, a baby octopus, 3 half-grown brown rats, a contribution from Roger, and a minute tortoise, newly hatched, that had been unable to survive the winter. The walls were sparsely but tastefully decorated with a slab slate containing the fossilized remains of a fish, a photograph of myself shaking hands with a chimpanzee, and a stuffed bat. I had prepared the bat myself without assistance, and I was extremely proud of the result. Considering how limited my knowledge of taxidermy was, it looked, I thought, extremely like a bat, especially if you stood at the other side of the room. With wings outstretched, it glowered down from the wall from its slab of cork. When summer came, however, The bat appeared to feel the heat. It sagged a little, its coat no longer glossy, and a new and mysterious smell started to make itself felt above the ether and methylated spirits. Poor Roger was wrongly accused at first, and it was only later, when the smell had penetrated even Larry's bedroom, that a thorough investigation traced the odour to my bat. I was surprised and not a little annoyed. Under pressure, I was forced to get rid of it. Peter explained that I had not cured it properly, and said that if I could obtain another specimen, he would show me the correct procedure. I thanked him profusely, but tactfully suggested that we keep the whole thing secret. I explained that the family now looked with a suspicious eye on the art of taxidermy, and it would require a lot of tedious persuasion to get them into an agreeable frame of mind. My efforts to secure another bat were unsuccessful. Armed with a long bamboo, I waited for hours in the moon-splashed corridors between the olive trees, but the bats flickered past like quicksilver and vanished before I could use my weapon. But, while waiting in vain for a chance to hit a bat, I saw a number of other night creatures which I would not otherwise have seen. I watched a young fox hopefully digging for beetles in the hillside, scrabbling slim paws of the earth and scrunching the insects up hungrily as he unearthed them. Once, 5 jackals appeared out of the metal bushes, paused in surprise at seeing me, and then melted among the trees like shadows. The nightjars, on silent, silky wings, would slide as smoothly as great black swallows along the rows of olives, sweeping across the grass in pursuit of the drunken, whirling crane flies. One night, a pair of squirrel dormice appeared on the tree above me, and chased each other in wild exuberance up and down the grove, leaping from branch to branch like acrobats, skittering up and down the tree trunks, their bushy tails like puffs of grey smoke in the moonlight. I was so fascinated by these creatures that I was determined to try to catch one. The best time to search for them was, of course, during the day when they would be asleep. So I hunted laboriously through the olive groves for their hideout. But it was a hopeless quest, for every gnarled and twisted trunk was hollow and each contained half a dozen holes. However, my patience did not go entirely unrewarded, for one day I thrust my arm into a hole, and my fingers closed round something small and soft, something that wiggled as I pulled it out. At first glance, my capture appeared to be an outsized bundle of dandelion seeds, furnished with a pair of enormous golden eyes. Closer inspection proved it to be a young Scops owl, still clad in his baby down. We regarded each other for a moment, and then the bird, apparently indignant at my ill-mannered laughter at his appearance, dug his tiny claws deeply into my thumb, and I lost my grip on the branch, so that we fell out of the tree together. I carried the indignant owlet back home in my pocket, and introduced him to the family with a certain trepidation. To my surprise, he was greeted with unqualified approval, and no objection was raised to my keeping him. He took up residence in a basket kept in my study, and after much argument, he was christened Ulysses. From the first, he showed that he was a bird of great strength of character, and not to be trifled with. Although he would have fitted comfortably into a teacup, he showed no fear, and would unhesitatingly attack anything and everyone, regardless of their size. As we all had to share the room, I felt it would be a good idea if he and Roger got on intimate terms. So, as soon as the owl had settled down, I performed the introductions by placing Ulysses on the floor and telling Roger to approach and make friends. Roger had become very philosophical about having to make friends with the various creatures that I adopted, and he took the appearance of an owl in his stride. Wagging his tail briskly in an ingratiating manner, he approached Ulysses, who squatted on the floor with anything but a friendly expression on his face. He watched Roger's approach in an unwinking stare of ferocity. Roger's advance became less confident. Ulysses continued to glare as though trying to hypnotize the dog. Roger stopped. His ears drooped, his tail wagging only feebly, and he glanced at me for inspiration. I ordered him sternly to continue his overtures of friendship. Roger looked nervously at the owl, and then, with great nonchalance, walked round him, in an effort to approach him from the back. Ulysses, however, let his head revolve too, and kept his eyes still fixed on the dog. Roger, never having met a creature who could look behind itself without turning round, seemed a trifle nonplussed. After a moment's thought, he decided to try the skittish, let's all have a jolly game approach. He lay down on his stomach, put his head between his paws, and crept slowly towards the bird, whining gently, wagging his tail with abandon. Ulysses continued to look as though he was stuffed. Roger, still progressing on his stomach, managed to get quite close. But then he made a fatal mistake. He pushed his woolly face forward and sniffed loudly and interestedly at the bird. Now, Ulysses would stand a lot, but he was not going to be sniffed at by a mountainous dog covered with black curls. He decided that he would have to show this ungainly and wingless beast exactly where he got off. He lowered his eyelids, clicked his beak, hopped up into the air, and landed squarely on the dog's muzzle, burying his razor-sharp claws in the black nose. Roger, with a stricken yelp, shook the bird off and retired beneath the table. No amount of coaxing would get him to come out until Ulysses was safely back in his basket. When Ulysses grew older, he lost his baby down and developed the fine ash-grey, rust-red plumage of his kind, with the pale breast handsomely marked with Maltese crosses in black. He also developed long ear tufts, which he would raise in indignation when you attempted to take liberties with him. As he was now far too old to be kept in a basket, and strongly opposed the idea of a cage, I was forced to give him the run of the study. He performed flying lessons between the table and the door handle, and as soon as he had mastered the art, chose the pelmet of the window as his home, and would spend the day sleeping up there, eyes closed, looking exactly like an olive stump. If you spoke to him, he would open his eyes a fraction, raise his ear tufts, and elongate his whole body, so that he looked like some weird, emaciated Chinese idol. If he was feeling particularly affectionate, he would click his beak at you, or, as a great concession, fly down and give you a hurried peck on the ear. As the sun sank and geckos started to scuttle about the shadowy walls of the house, Ulysses would wake up. He would yawn delicately, stretch his wings, clean his tail, and then shiver violently, so that all his feathers stood out like the petals of a wind-blown chrysanthemum. With great nonchalance, he would regurgitate a pellet of undigested food, the newspaper spread out below for this and other purposes. Having prepared himself for the night's work, he would utter an experimental choo to make sure his voice was in trim, and then launch himself on soft wings to drift round the room as silently as a flake of ash and land on my shoulder. For a short time, he would sit there, nibbling my ear, and then he would give himself another shake, put sentiment to one side, and become businesslike. He would fly onto the windowsill and give another questioning "Ooh?" staring at me with his honey-coloured eyes. This was the signal that he wanted the shutters opened. As soon as I threw them back, he would float out through the window, to be silhouetted for a moment against the moon, before diving into the dark olives. A moment later, a loud, challenging "Choo! Choo!" would ring out, the warning that Ulysses was about to start his hunting. The length of time Ulysses spent on hunts varied. Sometimes he would swoop back into the room after only an hour, and on other occasions he would be out all night. But wherever he went, he never failed to come back to the house between 9 and 10 for his supper. If there was no light in my study, he would fly down and peer through the drawing room window to see if I was there. If I was not there, he would fly out the side of the house again to land on my bedroom windowsill and tap briskly on the shutters until I opened them and served him with his saucer of mince, or chopped chicken's heart, or whatever delicacy was on the menu that day. When the last gory morsel had been swallowed, he would give a soft, hiccuping chirrup, sit meditating for a moment, and then fly off over the moon-bright treetops. Since he had proved himself an able fighter, Ulysses became fairly friendly towards Roger, and if we were going down for a late evening swim, I could sometimes prevail upon him to honour us with his company. He would ride on Roger's back, clinging tight to the black wool. If, as occasionally happened, Roger forgot his passenger and went too fast, or skittishly jumped over a stone, Ulysses' eye would blaze, his wings flap in a frantic effort to keep his balance, and he would click his beak loudly and indignantly until I reprimanded Roger for his carelessness. On the shore, Ulysses would perch on my shorts and shirt, while Roger and I gambled in the warm, shallow water. Ulysses would watch our antics with round and faintly disapproving eyes, sitting up as straight as a guardsman. Now and then he would leave his post to skim out over us, click his beak, and return to shore. But whether he did this in alarm for our safety or in order to join our game, I could never decide. Sometimes, if we took too long over the swim, we would get bored and fly up the hill to the garden, crying "Choo!" in farewell. In the summer, when the moon was full, The family took to bathing at night, but during the day the sun was so fierce that the sea became too hot to be refreshing. As soon as the moon had risen, we would make our way down through the trees to the creaking wooden jetty and clamber into the Sea Cow, our boat. With Larry and Peter on one oar, Margot and Leslie on the other, and Roger and myself in the bows to act as lookouts, we would drift down the coast for half a mile or so to where there was a small bay with a lip of white sand and a few carefully arranged boulders, smooth and still sun-warm, ideal for sitting on. We would anchor the Sea Cow in deep water and then dive over the side to gamble and plunge and set the moonlight shaking across the waters of the bay. When tired, we swam languidly to the shore and lay on the warm rocks, gazing up into the star-freckled sky. Generally, after half an hour or so, I would get bored of the conversation and slip back into the water and swim slowly out across the bay to lie on my back, cushioned by the warm sea, gazing up at the moon. One night, while I was occupied, I discovered that our bay was used by other creatures as well. Lying spread-eagled in the silky water, gazing up into the sky, only moving my hands and feet slightly to keep afloat, I was looking at the Milky Way, stretched out like a chiffon scarf across the sky, and wondering how many stars it contained. I could hear the voices of the others laughing and talking on the beach, echoing over the water, and by lifting my head, I could see their position on the shore by the pulsing lights of their cigarettes. Drifting there, relaxed and dreamy, I was suddenly startled to hear, quite close to me, a clock gurgle of water, followed by a long, deep sigh, and a series of gentle ripples rocked me up and down. Hastily, I righted myself and trod water, looking to see how far from the beach I had drifted. To my alarm, I found that not only was I some considerable distance from the shore, but from the Sea Cow as well, and I was not at all sure what sort of creature it was swimming around in the dark waters beneath me. I could hear the others laughing on the shore at some joke or other, and I saw someone flip a cigarette end high into the sky like a red star that curved over and extinguished itself at the rim of the sea. I was feeling more and more uncomfortable, and I was just about to call for assistance when, some 20 feet away from me, the sea seemed to part with a gentle swish and gurgle. Gleaming back appeared, gave a deep, satisfied sigh, and sank below the surface again. I had hardly time to recognize it as a porpoise before I found I was right in the midst of them. They rose all around me, sighing luxuriously, their black backs shining as they humped in the moonlight. There must have been about 8 of them, and one rose so close that I could have swum forward 3 strokes and touched his ebony head. Heaving and sighing heavily, they played across the bay, and I swam with them, watching fascinated as they rose to the surface, crumpling the water, breathed deeply, and then dived beneath the surface again, leaving only an expanding hoop of foam to mark the spot. Presently, as if obeying a signal, they turned and headed out of the bay towards the distant coast of Albania, and I trod water and watched them go, swimming in the white chain of moonlight, backs gleaming as they rose and plunged with heavy ecstasy in the water sweeping its fresh milk. Behind them, they left a trail of great bubbles that rocked and shone briefly like miniature moons before vanishing under the ripples. After this, we often met the porpoises when we went moonlight bathing, and one evening they put on an illuminated show for our benefit, aided by one of the most attractive insects that inhabited the island. We had discovered that in the hot months of the year, the sea became full of phosphorescence. When there was moonlight, this was not so noticeable. A faint greenish flicker around the bows of the boat, a brief flash as someone dived into the water. We found that the best time for the phosphorescence was when there was no moon at all. Another illuminated inhabitant of the summer months was the firefly. These slender brown beetles would fly as soon as it got dark, floating through the olive groves by the score, their tails flashing on and off, giving a light that was greenish-white, not golden-green as the sea was. Again, however, the fireflies were at their best when there was no bright moonlight to detract from their lights. Strangely enough, we would never have seen the porpoises, the fireflies, and the phosphorescence acting together if it had not been for Mother's bathing costume. For some time, Mother had greatly envied us our swimming, both in the daytime and at night, But as she pointed out when we suggested she join us, she was far too old for that sort of thing. Eventually, however, under constant pressure from us, Mother paid a visit into town and returned to the villa coyly bearing a mysterious parcel. Opening this, she astonished us all by holding up an extraordinary shapeless garment of black cloth, covered from top to bottom with hundreds of frills and pleats and tucks. Well, what do you think of it? Mother asked. We stared at the odd garment and wondered what it was for. What is it? Asked Larry at length. It's a bathing costume, of course, said Mother. What on earth did you think it was? It looks to me like a badly skinned whale, said Larry, peering at it closely. You can't possibly wear that, Mother, said Margot, horrified. Why, it looks as though it was made in 1920. What are all those frills and things for? Asked Larry with interest. Decoration, of course, said Mother indignantly. What a jolly idea. Don't forget to shake the fish out of them when you come out of the water. Well, I like it anyway, Mother said firmly, wrapping the monstrosity up again, and I'm going to wear it. Why on earth didn't you get something more up to date? Said Margot. When you get to my age, dear, you can't go around in a two-piece bathing suit. You don't have the figure for it. I'd love to know what sort of figure that was designed for, remarked Larry. You really are hopeless, Mother, said Margot despairingly. But I like it, and I'm not asking you to wear it, Mother pointed out belligerently. That's right, you do what you want to do, agreed Larry. Don't be put off. It'll probably suit you very well if you can grow another 3 or 4 legs to go with it. Mother snorted indignantly and swept upstairs to try on her costume. Presently, she called us to come and see the effect, and we all trooped up to the bedroom. Roger was the first to enter, and on being greeted by this strange apparition, clad in its voluminous black costume rippling with frills, he retreated hurriedly through the door, backwards, barking ferociously. It was some time before we could persuade him that it really was Mother, and even then he kept giving her vaguely uncertain looks from the corner of his eye. However, in spite of all opposition, Mother stuck to her tent-like bathing suit, and in the end, we gave up. In order to celebrate her first entry into the sea, we decided to have a moonlight picnic down at the bay, and sent an invitation to Theodore, who was the only stranger that Mother would tolerate on such a great occasion. The day for the great immersion arrived. Food and wine were prepared, the boat was cleaned out and filled with cushions, and everything was ready when Theodore turned up. On hearing that we had planned a moonlight picnic and swim, he reminded us that on this particular night there was no moon. Everyone blamed everyone else for not having checked on the moon's progress, and the argument went on until dusk. Eventually, we decided that we would go on the picnic in spite of everything, since all the arrangements were made. So we staggered down to the boat, loaded down with food, wine, towels and cigarettes, and set off down the coast. Theodore and I sat in the bows as lookouts. The rest took it in turn to row while Mother steered. To begin with, her eyes not having become accustomed to the dark, Mother skillfully steered us in a tight circle, so that after 10 minutes strenuous rowing, the jetty suddenly loomed up and we ran into it with a splintering crash. Unnerved by this, Mother went to the opposite extreme and steered out to sea, and we would eventually have made landfall somewhere on the Albanian coastline if Leslie had not noticed in time. After this, Margot took over the steering, and she did it quite well, except that she would, in a crisis, get flurried and forget that to turn right, one put the tiller over to the left. The result was that we had to spend 10 minutes straining and tugging at the boat, which Margot had, in her excitement, steered onto, instead of away from, a rock. Taken all round, it was an auspicious start to Mother's first day. Eventually, we reached the bay, spread out the rugs on the sand, arranged the food, placed the battalion of wine bottles in a row in the shallows to keep cool, and the great moment had arrived. Amid much cheering, Mother removed her housecoat and stood revealed in all her glory, clad in the bathing costume which made her look, as Larry pointed out, like a sort of marine Albert Memorial. Roger behaved very well until he saw Mother wade into the shallow water in a slow and dignified manner. He then got terribly excited. He seemed to be under the impression that the bathing costume was some sort of sea monster that had enveloped Mother and was now about to carry her out to sea. Barking wildly, he flung himself to the rescue, grabbed one of the frills dangling so plentifully round the edge of the costume, and tugged with all his strength in order to pull Mother back to safety. Mother, who had just remarked that she thought the water a little cold, suddenly found herself being pulled backwards. With a squeak of dismay, she lost her footing and sat down heavily in 2 feet of water, while Roger tugged so hard that a large section of frill gave way. Elated by the fact that the enemy appeared to be disintegrating, Roger, growling encouragement to Mother, set to work to remove the rest of the offending monster from her person. We writhed on the sand, helpless with laughter, while Mother sat gasping in the shallows, making desperate attempts to regain her feet, beat Roger off, and retain at least a portion of her costume. Unfortunately, owing to the extreme thickness of the material from which the costume was constructed, the air was trapped inside. The effect of the water made it inflate like a balloon, and trying to keep this airship of frills and tucks under control added to Mother's difficulties. In the end, it was Theodore who shooed Roger away and helped Mother to her feet. Eventually, after we had partaken of a glass of wine to celebrate what Larry referred to as Perseus's rescue of Andromeda, we went in to swim, and Mother sat discreetly in the shallows while Roger crouched nearby, growling ominously at the costumes that bulged and fluttered around Mother's waist. The phosphorescence was particularly good that night. By plunging your hand into the water and dragging it along, you could draw a wide golden green ribbon of cold fire across the sea. And when you dived, as you hit the surface, it seemed as though you had plunged into a frosty furnace of glinting light. When we were tired, we waded out of the sea, the water running off our bodies so that we seemed to be on fire, and lay on the sand to eat. Then, as the wine was opened at the end of the meal, as if by arrangement, a few fireflies appeared in the olives behind us, a sort of overture to the show. First of all, there were just 2 or 3 green specks sliding smoothly through the trees, winking regularly. Gradually, more and more appeared, until parts of the olive grove were lit with a weird green glow. Never had we seen so many fireflies congregated in one spot. They flicked through the trees in swarms. They crawled on the grass, the bushes, and the olive trunks. They drifted in swarms over our heads, landed on the rugs like green embers. Glittering streams of them flew out over the bay, swirling over the water, and then, right on cue, the porpoises appeared, swimming in line into the bay, rocking rhythmically through the water, their backs as if painted with phosphorus. In the center of the bay, they swam round, diving and rolling, occasionally leaping high in the air and falling back into a conflagration of light. With the fireflies above and the illuminated porpoises below, it was a fantastic sight. We could even see the luminous trails beneath the surface, where the porpoises swam in fiery patterns across the sandy bottom. And when they leapt high in the air, the drops of emerald glowing water flicked from them, and you could not tell if it was phosphorescence or fireflies you were looking at. For an hour or so, we watched this pattern, and then slowly the fireflies drifted back inland and farther down the coast. Then the porpoises lined up and sped out to sea, leaving a flaming path behind them that flickered and glowed, and then died slowly, like a glowing branch laid across the bay. As the summer grew hotter and hotter, we decided that it required too much effort to row the Sea Cow down the coast to our bathing bay, so we invested in an outboard engine. The acquisition of this machine opened up a vast area of coastland for us, for we could now venture much farther afield, making trips along the jagged coastline to remote and deserted beaches golden as corn, or lying like fallen moons among the contorted rocks. It was thus that I became aware of the fact that stretching along the coast for miles was a scattered archipelago of small islands, some fairly extensive, some that were really outsized rocks with a wig of greenery perched precariously on top. For some reason which I could not discover, the sea fauna were greatly attracted by this archipelago. And round the edges of the islands, rock pools and sandy bays the size of a large table, there was a bewildering assortment of life. I managed to inveigle the family into several trips to these islands, but as these had few good bathing spots, the family soon got bored having to sit on sun-baked rocks while I fished interminably in the pools and unearthed at intervals strange and to them revolting sea creatures. Also, the islands were strung out close to the
Be right
coast,
back.
some of them being separated from the mainland only by a channel 20 feet wide, and there were plenty of reefs of rocks. So guiding the Sea Cow through these hazards, and making sure the propeller did not strike or break, made any excursion to the islands a difficult navigational problem. Our trips there became less and less frequent, in spite of all arguments on my part, and I was tortured by the thought of all the wonderful animal life waiting in Olympic pools to be caught. But I was unable to do anything about it, simply because I had no boat. I suggested that I might be allowed to take the sea cow out myself, say once a week, but the family were, for a variety of reasons, against this. But then, just when I had almost given up hope, I was struck with a brilliant idea. My birthday was due fairly soon, and if I dealt with the family skillfully, I felt sure I could not only get a boat, but a lot of other equipment as well. I therefore suggested to the family that instead of letting them choose my birthday presents, I might tell them the things I wanted most. In this way, they could be sure of not disappointing me. The family, rather taken aback, agreed, and then, somewhat suspiciously, asked me what I wanted. Innocently, I said that I hadn't thought about it much, but that I would work out a list for each person and they could then choose one or more items on it. My list took a lot of time and thought to work out, and a considerable amount of applied psychology. Mother, for instance, I knew would buy me everything on her list, so I put down some of the most necessary and expensive equipment. 5 wooden cases, glass-topped, cork-lined, to house my insect collection. 24 test tubes, 5 pints of methylated spirits, 5 pints of formalin, and a microscope. Margot's list was a little more difficult, for the items had to be chosen so that they would encourage her to go to her favourite shops. So from her, I asked for 10 yards of butter muslin, 10 yards of white calico, 6 large packets of pins, 2
Let's
bundles of
choose
cotton wool, 2 pints of
smaller
milk, a pair of forceps, and 2 fountain pens.
brush.
It was, I realised resignedly, quite useless to ask Larry for anything like formalin or
Maybe
pins.
even
But
smaller.
if my list showed some sort of literary reasoning, I stood a good chance. Accordingly, I made out a formidable sheet covered with the titles, authors' names, publishers, and price of all the natural history books I felt in need of, and put an asterisk against those that would be most gratefully received. Since I had only one request left, I decided to tackle Leslie verbally
Maybe I'll
instead of
try
adding
this
to the
one.
list. But I knew I should have to choose my moment with care. I had to wait some days for what I considered to be a precious moment. I had just helped him to the successful conclusion of some ballistic experiments he was making, which involved tying an ancient muzzleloader to a tree and firing it by means of a long string attached to the trigger. At the 4th attempt, we achieved what apparently Leslie considered to be a success. The barrel burst, and bits of metal whined in all directions. Leslie was delighted and made copious notes on the back of an envelope. Together we set about picking up the remains of the gun. While we were thus engaged, I casually asked him what he would like to give me for my birthday. Hadn't thought about it, he replied absently, examining with evident satisfaction a contorted piece of metal. I don't mind, anything you like, you choose. I said I wanted a boat. Leslie, realizing how he had been trapped, said indignantly that a boat was far too large a present for a birthday, and anyway he couldn't afford it. I said, equally indignantly, that he had told me to choose what I liked. Leslie said, yes, he had, but he hadn't meant a boat, as they were terribly expensive. I said that when one said anything, one meant anything, which included boats. And anyway, I didn't expect him to buy me one. I had thought, since he knew so much about boats, he would be able to build me one. However, if he thought that would be too difficult... Of course it's not difficult, said Leslie unguardedly, and then added hastily, well, not terribly difficult, but it's the time. It would take ages and ages to do. Look, wouldn't it be better if I took you out in the sea cow twice a week? But I was adamant. I wanted a boat, and I was quite prepared to wait for it. Oh, all right, Leslie said exasperatedly. I'll build you a boat, but I'm not having you hanging around while I do it, understand? You're to keep well away. You're not to see it until it's finished. Delighted, I agreed to these conditions. And so for the next 2 weeks, Spiro kept turning up with carloads of planks, and the sounds of sawing, hammering, and blasphemy floated round from the back veranda. The house was littered with wood shavings, and everywhere he walked, Leslie left a trail of sawdust. I found it fairly easy to restrain my impatience and curiosity, for I had, at that time, something else to occupy me. Some repairs had just been completed to the back of the house, and 3 large bags of beautiful pink cement had been left over. These I had
No, I
appropriated.
don't like this
I
one.
set to work to build a series of
It's
small
for lettering.
ponds in which which I could keep not only my freshwater fauna,
Not for
but
painting.
also the wonderful sea creatures I hoped to catch in my new boat. Digging ponds in midsummer was harder work than I had anticipated. But eventually, I had some reasonably square holes dug, and a couple of days splashing around in the sticky porridge of lovely coral pink cement soon revived me. Leslie's trails of sawdust and shaving through the house were now interwoven with a striking pattern of pink footprints. The day before my birthday, the entire family made an expedition to town. The reasons for this were twofold. Firstly, they wanted to purchase my presents. Secondly, the larder had to be stocked up. We had agreed that we would not invite a lot of people to the party. We said we didn't like crowds, and so 10 guests, carefully selected, were the most we were prepared to put up with. It would be a small but distinguished gathering of people we liked best. Having unanimously decided on this, each member of the family then proceeded to invite 10 people. Unfortunately, they didn't all invite the same 10, with the exception of Theodore, who received 5 separate invitations. The result was that Mother, on the eve of the party, suddenly discovered we were going to have not 10 guests, but 45. We returned in the evening exhausted and irritable, the car piled high with food. The following morning was full of incident. My presents having been duly inspected and the family thanked, I then went round to the back of the veranda with Leslie. There lay a mysterious shape covered with a tarpaulin. Leslie drew this aside with the air of a conjurer, and there lay my boat. I gazed at it rapturously. It was surely the most perfect boat that anyone had ever had. Gleaming in her coat of new paint, she lay there, my steed to the enchanted archipelago. The boat was some 7 feet long, and almost circular in shape. Leslie explained hurriedly, in case I thought the shape was due to defective craftsmanship. The reason for this was that the planks had been too short for the frame, an explanation I found perfectly satisfactory. After all, it was the sort of irritating thing that could have happened to anyone. I said stoutly that I thought it was a lovely shape for a boat, and indeed I thought it was. She was not sleek, slim, and rather predatory looking like most boats, but rotund, placid, and somehow comforting in her circular solidarity. She reminded me of an earnest dung beetle, an insect for which I had great affection. Leslie, pleased at my evident delight, said deprecatingly that he had been forced to make her flat-bottomed, since, for a variety of technical reasons, this was the safest. I said that I liked flat-bottomed boats the best, because it was possible to put jars of specimens on the floor without so much risk of them upsetting. Leslie asked me if I liked the colour scheme, as he had not been too sure about it. Now, in my opinion, the colour scheme was the best thing about it, the final touch that completed the craft. Inside, she was painted green and white, while her bulging sides were tastefully covered in white, black, and brilliant orange stripes, a combination of colours that struck me as being both artistic and friendly. Leslie then showed me the long, smooth cypress pole he had cut for the mast, but explained that it could not be fitted into position until the boat was launched. Enthusiastically, I suggested launching her at once. Leslie, who was a stickler for procedure, said you couldn't launch a ship without naming her, and had I thought of a name yet? This was a difficult problem, and the whole family were called out to help me solve it. They stood clustered round the boat, which looked like a gigantic flower in their midst, and racked their brains. Why not call it the Jolly Roger, suggested Margot. I rejected it scornfully. I explained that I wanted a sort of fat name that would go with the boat's appearance and personality. Arbuckle, suggested Mother vaguely. That was no use either. The boat simply didn't look like an arbuckle. Call it the Ark, said Leslie, but I shook my head. There was another silence while we all stared at the boat. Suddenly, I had it. The perfect name. Bootle. That's what I'd call her. Very nice, dear, approved Mother. I was just about to suggest the bum trinket, said Larry. Larry, dear, Mother approved. Don't teach the boy things like that. I turned Larry's suggestion over in my mind. It was certainly an unusual name, but then so was Bootle. Both seemed to conjure up the shape and personality of the boat. After much thought, I decided what to do. A pot of black paint was produced, and laboriously, in rather tricky capitals, I traced her name along the side. The Bootle Bum Trinket. There it was. Not only an unusual name, but an aristocratically hyphenated one as well. In order to ease Mother's mind, I had to promise that I would only refer to the boat as the Bootle in conversation with strangers. The matter of the name being settled, we set about the task of launching. It took the combined efforts of Margot, Peter, Leslie and Larry to carry the boat down the hill to the jetty, while Mother and I followed behind with the mast and a small bottle of wine which to do the launching properly. At the end of the jetty, the boat bearers stopped, swaying with exhaustion. Mother and I struggled with the cork of the wine bottle.
What are you doing?
Asked Larry irritably.
For heaven's sake, hurry up. I'm not used to being a slipway.
At last, we got the cork from the bottle, and I announced in a clear voice that I christened the ship the Bootle Bum Trinket. We pushed the boat off the jetty with a mighty heave, and she landed on her flat bottom with a report like a cannon, showering seawater in all directions. Then bobbed steadily and confidently over the east. She had the faintest suggestion of list to starboard, but I generously attributed this to the wine and not to Leslie's workmanship.
Now, said Leslie, organising the boat. Let's get the mast in. Margot, you hold her nose. That's it. Now, Peter, if you'll get into the stern, Larry and I will hand you the mast. All you have to do is stick it in that socket.
So, while Margot lay on her tummy holding the nose of the boat, Peter leapt nimbly into the stern and settled himself, with legs apart, received the mast which Larry and Leslie were holding. The mast looks a bit wrong to me, Les, said Larry, eyeing it critically.
Nonsense. It'll be fine when it's in, retorted Leslie. Now, are you ready, Peter?
Peter nodded, braced himself, clasped the mast firmly in both hands, and plunged it into the socket. Then he stood back, dusted his hands, and the Bootle Bum Trinket, the speed remarkable for a craft of her circumference, turned turtle. Peter, clad in his one decent suit, which he had put on in honour of my birthday, disappeared with scarcely a splash. All that remained on the surface of the water was his hat, mast, and the Bootle Bum Trinket's bright orange bottom.
You drowned! You drowned!
Screamed Margot, who always tended to be on the dark side of the crisis.
Nonsense, it's not deep enough,
said Leslie. I told you that mast was too long, said Larry unctuously.
It isn't too long.
Leslie snapped irritably.
That fool didn't set it right. Don't you dare call him a fool.
You can't fit a 20-foot mast onto a thing like a wash tub and expect it to keep upright, said Larry.
If you're so damn clever, why didn't you make the boat?
I wasn't asked to. Besides, you're supposed to be the expert. Now, don't argue about it, dears, said Mother lucidly.
Well, Larry's so damn patronising.
Thank God, he's come up, said Margot in fervent tones, as the bedraggled and spluttering Peter rose to the surface. We hauled him out, and Margot hurried him up to the house to get his suit dry before the party. The rest of us followed, still arguing. Leslie, incensed at Larry's criticism, changed into trunks and, armed with a massive manual on yacht construction and a tape measure, went down to salvage the boat. For the rest of the morning, he kept sawing bits off the mast, until she eventually floated upright. But by then, the mast was only about 3 feet high. Leslie was very puzzled, but he promised to fit a new mast as soon as he'd worked out the correct specification. So, the Bootle Bum Trinket, tied to the end of the jetty, floated there in all her glory, looking like a very vivid, overweight Manx cat. Spiro arrived soon after lunch, bringing with him a tall, elderly man who had the air of an ambassador. This, Spiro explained, was the King of Greece's ex-butler, who had been prevailed upon to come out of retirement and help with the party. Spiro then turned everyone out of the kitchen, and he and the butler closeted themselves in there together. When I went round and peered through the window, I saw the butler in his waistcoat polishing glasses, while Spiro, scowling thoughtfully and humming to himself, was attacking a vast pile of vegetables. Occasionally, he would waddle over and blow vigorously at the 7 charcoal fires along the wall, making them glow like rubies. The first guest to arrive was Theodore, sitting spick and span in a carriage, his best suit on, his boots polished, and, as a concession to the occasion, without any collecting gear. He clasped in one hand a walking stick, and in the other a neatly tied parcel. Aha! Many happy returns of the day, he said, shaking my hand. I have brought you a small gift to commemorate the occasion. On opening the parcel, I was delighted to find that it contained a fat volume entitled Life in Ponds and Streams. I think you will find it a useful addition to your library, said Theodore, rocking on his toes. It contains some very interesting information on general freshwater life. Gradually, the guests arrived. At the front of the villa was a surging mass of carriages and taxis. The great drawing room and dining room were full of people, talking and arguing and laughing, and the butler, who to Mother's dismay had donned a tailcoat, moved swiftly through the elderly throng like a penguin, serving drinks and food with such a regal air that a lot of guests were not at all sure if he was a real butler or merely some eccentric relative we had staying with us. Down in the kitchen, Spiro drank prodigious quantities of wine as he moved among the pots and pans, his scowling face glowing redly in the light of the fires, his deep voice roaring out in song. More and more guests arrived, and with them came presents. Most of these were, from my point of view, useless, as they could not be adapted for natural history work. The best of the presents were, in my opinion, 2 puppies, brought by a peasant family I knew who lived not far away. One puppy was liver and white with large ginger eyebrows, and the other was coal black with large ginger eyebrows. As they were presents the family had, of course, to accept them. Roger viewed them with suspicion and interest. So in order that they should get acquainted, I locked them in the dining room with a large plate of delicacies between them. The results were not quite what I had anticipated, for when the flood of guests grew so large that we had to slide back the doors and let some of them into the dining room, we found Roger seated gloomily on the floor, the 2 puppies gambolling round him, while the room was decorated in a fashion that left us in no doubt that the new additions had both eaten and drunk to their heart's content. Larry's suggestion that they be called Whittle and Puke was greeted with disgust by Mother, but the name stuck, and Whittle and Puke they remained. Still the guests came, overflowing the drawing room into the dining room and out of the French windows onto the veranda. Some of them had come thinking that they would be bored, but after an hour or so they called their carriages, went home, and reappeared with the rest of their families. The wine flowed, the air was blue with cigarette smoke, and the geckos were too frightened to come out of the cracks in the ceiling because of the noise and laughter. In one corner of the room, Theodore, having daringly removed his coat, was dancing the Calamatiano with Leslie and several other more exhilarating guests, their feet crashing and shuddering on the floor as they leapt and stamped. The butler, having perhaps taken a little more wine than was good for him, was so carried away by the sight of the national dance that he put his tray down and joined in, leaping and stamping as vigorously as anyone, in spite of his age. Mother, smiling in a rather forced and distraught manner, was wedged between the English padre, who was looking with increasing disapproval at the revelry, and the Belgian consul, who was chattering away in her ear and twirling his moustache. Spiro appeared from the kitchen to find out where the butler had got to, and promptly joined him too. Balloons drifted across the room, bouncing against the dancers' legs, exploding suddenly with loud bangs. Larry, out on the veranda, was endeavouring to teach a group of Greeks some of the finer English limericks. Puke and Whittle had gone to sleep in someone's hat. The sea was dawn calm, and the eastern horizon flushed with pink when we stood yawning at the front door, and the last carriage clopped its way down the drive. As I lay in bed with Roger across my feet, a puppy on each side of me, and Ulysses sitting fluffed out on the helmet, I gazed through the window at the sky, watching the pink spread across the olive tops, extinguishing the stars one by one, and thought that, taken all round, it had been an extremely good birthday party. Very early next morning, I packed my collecting gear and some food, and with Roger, Whittle and Puke for company, set off on a voyage in the Bootle Bum Trinket. The sea was calm, the sun was shining out of a gentian blue sky, and there was just the faintest breeze. It was a perfect day. The Bootle Bum Trinket wallowed up the coast in a slow and dignified manner, while Roger sat in the bows as lookout, and Whittle and Puke ran from one side of the boat to the other, fighting, trying to lean over the side and drink the sea, and generally behaving in a pathetically landlubberish fashion. The joy of having a boat of your own, the feeling of pleasant power as you pulled on the oars, and felt the boat surge forward with a quick rustle of water, like someone cutting silk, the sun gently warming your back and making the sea surface flicker with 100 different colours. The thrill of wending your way through the complex maze of weed-shaggy reefs that glowed just beneath the surface of the sea. It was even with pleasure that I contemplated the blisters that were rising on my palms, making my hands feel stiff and awkward. Though I spent many days voyaging in the Bootle Bum Trinket and had many adventures, there was nothing to compare with that very first voyage. The sea seemed bluer, more limpid and transparent. The islands seemed more remote, sun-drenched and enchanting than ever before. And it seemed as though the life of the sea had congregated in the little bays and channels to greet me in my new boat. 100 feet or so from an islet, I shipped the oars and scrambled up to the bows, where I lay side by side with Roger, peering down through a fathom of crystal water at the sea bottom, while the Bootle Bum Trinket floated towards the shore with the placid buoyancy of a celluloid duck. As the boat's turtle-shaped shadow edged across the seabed, the multicolored, ever-moving tapestry of sea life unfolded. In the patches of silver sand, the clams were stuck upright in small clusters, their mouths gaping. Sometimes, perched between the shell's horny lips, there would be a tiny, pale ivory pea crab, the frail, soft-shelled, degenerate creature that lived a parasitic life in the safety of the great shell's corrugated walls. It was interesting to set off the clam colony's burglar alarm. I drifted over a group of them until they lay below, gaping up at me, and then gently edged the handle of the butterfly net down and tapped on the shell. Immediately, the shell snapped shut, the movement causing a small puff of white sand to swirl up like a tornado. As the currents of this shell's alarm slid through the water, the rest of the colony felt them. In a moment, clams were slamming their front doors shut left and right, and the water was full of little whirls of sand, drifting and swirling about the shells, falling back to the seabed like silver dust. On the reefs that were only a few inches below the water, and that were uncovered at low tide, you found the thickest congregation of life. In the shady clefts among the weeds, the sea urchins would be gathered in clusters, like shining brown horse-chestnut seed cases, their spines moving gently like compass needles towards possible danger. Around them, the anemones clung to the rocks, plump and lustrous, their arms waving in an abandoned and somehow Eastern-looking dance, in an effort to catch the shrimps that flipped past, transparent as glass. Routing in the dark underwater caverns, I unearthed a baby octopus, who settled on the rocks like a Medusa head, blushed to a muddy brown, and regarded me with rather sad eyes from beneath the bald dome of his head. A further movement on my part, and it spat out a small storm cloud of black ink that hung and rolled in the clear water, while the octopus skimmed off behind it, shooting through the water with its arms trailing behind it, looking like a streamer-decorated balloon. There were crabs too, fat, green, shiny ones on the tops of the reef, waving their claws in what appeared to be a friendly manner. And down below, on the weedy bed of the sea, the spider crabs with their strange, spiky-edged shells, their long, thin legs, each wearing a coat of weeds, sponges, or occasionally an anemone, which they had carefully planted on their backs. Everywhere on the reefs, the weed patches, the sandy bottom, moved hundreds of top shells, neatly striped and speckled in blue, silver, grey, and red, with the scarlet and rather indignant face of a hermit crab peering out from underneath. They were like small, ungainly caravans moving about, bumping into each other, bargaining through the weeds, or rumbling swiftly across the sand among the towering clamshells and sea fans. The sun sank lower. The water in the bays and below the tottering castles of rock was washed with a slate grey of evening shadow. Slowly, the oars creaking softly to themselves, I rowed the Bootle Bum Trinket homes. Whittle and Puke lay asleep, exhausted by the sun and sea air, their paws twitching, their ginger eyebrows moving as they chased green crabs across endless reefs. Roger sat surrounded by glass jars and tubes in which tiny fish hung suspended. Anemones waved their arms, and spider crabs touched the sides of their glass prisons with delicate claws. He sat staring down into the jars, ears pricked, occasionally looking up at me, wagging his tail briefly, before becoming absorbed once again in his studies. Roger was a keen student of marine life. The sun gleamed like a coin behind the olive trees, and the sea was striped with gold and silver when the Bootle Bum Trinket brought her round behind, bumping gently against the jetty. Hungry, thirsty, Tired, with my head buzzing, full of the colours and shapes I had seen, I carried my precious specimen slowly up the hill to the villa, while the three dogs, yawning and stretching, followed behind. As the summer drew to a close, I found myself, to my delight, once more without a tutor. Mother had discovered that, as she so delicately put it, Margot and Peter were becoming too fond of one another. As the family was unanimous in its disapproval of Peter as a prospective relation by marriage, something obviously had to be done. Leslie's only contribution to the problem was to suggest shooting Peter, a plan that was, for some reason, greeted derisively. I thought it was a splendid idea. I was in the minority. Larry's suggestion that the happy couple should be sent to live in Athens for a month in order, as he explained, to get it out of their systems, was quashed by Mother on the grounds of immorality. Eventually, Mother dispensed with Peter's services. He left hurriedly and furtively, and we had to cope with a tragic, tearful, and wildly indignant Margot, who, dressed in her most flowing and gloomy clothing for the event, played her part magnificently. Mother soothed and uttered gentle platitudes. Larry gave Margot lectures on free love, and Leslie, for reasons best known to himself, decided to play the part of the outraged brother, and kept appearing at intervals, brandishing a revolver and threatening to shoot Peter down like a dog if he set foot in the house again. In the midst of all this, Margot, tears trickling effectively down her face, made tragic gestures and told us her life was blighted. Spiro, who loved a good dramatic situation as well as anyone, spent his time weeping in sympathy with Margot and posting various friends of his along the docks to make sure that Peter did not attempt to get back onto the island. We all enjoyed ourselves very much. Just as the thing seemed to be dying a natural death, and Margot was able to eat a whole meal without bursting into tears, she got a note from Peter saying he would return for her. Margot, rather panic-stricken by the idea, showed the note to Mother, and once more the family leapt with enthusiasm into the farce. Margot stayed closeted in the attic for a week. She was eventually brought down from there by a situation which made a fitting climax to the whole affair. Leslie had discovered that several small items had been vanishing from the sea cow, and he suspected the fisherman who rode past the jetty at night. He decided that he would give the thieves something to think about, so he attached to his bedroom window 3 long-barreled shotguns aiming down the hill at the jetty. By an ingenious arrangement of strings, he could fire one barrel after the other without even getting out of bed. The range was, of course, too far to do any damage, but the whistling of shot through the olive leaves and the splashing as it pattered into the sea would, he felt, act as a fairly good deterrent. So carried away was he by his own brilliance that he omitted to mention to anyone that he had constructed this burglar trap. We had all retired to our rooms and were variously occupied. The house was silent. Outside came the gentle whispering of crickets in the hot night air. Suddenly, there came a rapid series of colossal explosions that rocked the house and set all the dogs barking downstairs. I rushed out onto the landing, where pandemonium reigned. The dogs had rushed upstairs in a body to join the fun, and were leaping about, yelping excitedly. Mother, looking wild and distraught, had rushed out of her bedroom in her voluminous nightie, under the impression that Margot had committed suicide. Larry burst angrily from his room to find out what the row was about. Margot, under the impression that Peter had returned to claim her and was being slaughtered by Leslie, was fumbling with the lock on the attic door and screaming at the top of her voice. "She's done something silly! She's done something silly!" wailed Mother, making frantic endeavours to get herself free from Whittle and Puke, who, thinking this was all a jolly nocturnal romp, had seized the end of her nightie and were tugging at it, growling ferociously. "It's the limit! You can't even sleep in peace! This family's driving me mad!" bellowed Larry. "Don't hurt him! Leave him alone! You cowards!" came Margot's voice, shrill and tearful, as she scrabbled wildly in an attempt to get the attic door opened. "Burglars! Keep calm! It's only burglars!" yelled Leslie, opening his bedroom door. Eventually, Mother struggled up to the attic, trailing Whittle and Puke from the hem of her night attire, and, white and shaking, threw open the door to find an equally white and shaking Margot. After a lot of confusion, we discovered what had happened, and what each of us had thought. Mother, trembling with shock, reprimanded Leslie severely. "You mustn't do things like that, dear," she pointed out. "It's really stupid. If you fire your guns off, do at least let us know.
yes, said Larry bitterly. Just give us a bit of warning, will you? Shout timber or something of the sort. I don't see how I can be expected to take burglars by surprise if I've got to shout out warnings to you all, said Leslie aggrievedly. I'm damned if I see why we should be taken by surprise too, said Larry. Well, ring a bell or something, dear. Only please don't do that again. It's made me feel quite queer. But the episode got Margot out of the attic, which, as Mother said, was one mercy. Spring had arrived, and the island was sparkling with flowers. Lambs with flapping tails gamboled under the olives, crushing the yellow crocuses under their tiny hooves. Baby donkeys with bulbous and uncertain legs munched among the asphodels. The ponds and streams and ditches were tangled in chains of spotted toad spawn. The tortoises were heaving aside their winter bedclothes of leaves and earth, and the first butterflies, winter-faced and frayed, were flitting wanly among the flowers. In the crisp, heady weather, the family spent most of its time on the veranda, eating, sleeping, reading, or just simply arguing. It was here, once a week, that we used to congregate to read our mail, which Spiro had brought after us. The bulk consisted of gun catalogues for Leslie, fashion magazines for Margot, and animal journals for myself. Larry's post generally contained books and interminable letters from authors, artists, and musicians. Mother's contained a wedge of mail from various relatives, sprinkled with a few seed catalogues. As we
Oh,
browsed,
Trinity, hi. How are you? Long
This
time no
was done without any
see.
motive of sociability, for no other member of the family would listen anyway, but merely because we seemed unable to extract the full flavour of our letters and magazines unless they were shared. Occasionally, however, an item of news would be sufficiently startling to rivet the family's attention on it. And this happened one day in spring when the sky was like blue glass, and we sat in the dappled shade of the vine, devouring our mail. Mother always left until the last a fat letter, addressed in large, firm, well-rounded handwriting, which was the monthly instalment from Great Aunt Hermione. Her letters invariably created an indignant uproar among the family, so we all put aside our mail and concentrated when Mother, with a sigh of resignation, unfurled the 20-odd
great.
pages, settled herself comfortably,
Nice
and
to
began to
hear
read.
it.
She says that the doctors don't hold out much hope for her, observed Mother. They haven't held out much hope for her for the last 40 years, and she's still as strong as an ox, said Larry. She says she always thought it a little peculiar of us rushing off to Greece like that, but they've just had a bad winter,
It's
and
nice
she
to see you
thinks perhaps it
again.
was wise of us
Yeah.
to choose such a salubrious climate. Salubrious? What a word to use, said Larry. She says that she wants to come and stay. The doctors have advised a warm climate. No,
Hi,
I
please.
refuse. I couldn't bear it, shouted Larry, leaping to his feet. You'll have to put her off,
How
Mother.
are you?
Tell her there's no room. But I can't, dear. I told her in the last letter what a big villa we had. She's probably forgotten, said Leslie, hopefully. She hasn't. She mentions it here. Where is it? Oh, yes, here you are. As you now seem able to afford such an extensive establishment, I am sure, Louis dear, that you would not begrudge a small corner to an old woman who has not much longer to live. There you are. What on earth can we do? Write and tell her we've got an epidemic of smallpox raging out here, and send her a photograph of Margot's acne, suggested Larry. Don't be silly, dear. Besides, I told her how healthy it is here. Really,
My
Mother,
day
you
is
are
going
impossible, exclaimed
great.
Larry angrily.
I
was looking
hope
forward
you
to a nice,
too.
quiet summer's work with just a few select friends, and now we're going to be invaded by that evil old camel.
Just
smelling
chill
of mothballs and
time.
singing hymns in the lavatory. Really, dear, you do exaggerate, and I don't know why you have to bring lavatories into it. I've never heard her sing hymns anywhere. She does nothing else but sing hymns. Lead kindly light while everyone queues on the landing. Well, anyway, we've got to think of a good excuse. I can't write and tell her we don't want her because she sings hymns. Why not? Don't be unreasonable, Larry. After all, she is a relation. What on earth's that got to do with it? Why should we have to fawn all over the old hag because she's a relation, when the really sensible thing to do would be to burn her at the stake? She's not as bad as that, protested Mother half-heartedly. My dear Mother, of all the foul relatives with which we are cluttered, she is definitely the worst. Why you keep in touch with her, I cannot for the life of me imagine. Well, I've just got to answer her letters, haven't I? Why? Just write "gone away" across them and send them back. I couldn't do that, dear. They'd recognize my handwriting, said Mother vaguely. Besides, I've opened this now. Can't one of us write and say you're ill? Suggested Margot. Yes, we'll say the doctors have given up hope, said Leslie. I'll write the letter, said Larry. I'll get one of those lovely black-edged envelopes. That will add an air of verisimilitude to the whole thing. You will do nothing of the sort, said Mother firmly. If you did that, she'd come straight out to nurse me. You know what she is. Why keep in touch with them? That's what I want to know, asked Larry despairingly. What satisfaction does it give you? They're all either fossilized or mental. Indeed, they are not mental, said Mother indignantly. Nonsense, Mother. Look at Aunt Bertha, keeping flocks of imaginary cats. And there's Great Uncle Patrick, who wanders about nude and tells complete strangers how he killed whales with a penknife. They're all bats, but they're not mental, explained Mother, adding candidly, anyway, not enough to be put away. Well, if we're going to be invaded by relations, there's only one thing to do, said Larry resignedly. What's that? Inquired Mother, peering over her spectacles expectantly. We must move, of course. Move? Move where? Asked Mother. Move to a smaller villa. Then you can write to all these zombies and tell them we haven't any room. But don't be stupid, Larry. We can't keep moving. We moved here in order to cope with your friends. Well, now we'll have to move to cope with the relations. But we can't keep rushing to and fro about the island. People will think we've gone mad. They'll think we're even madder if that old harpy turns up. Honestly, Mother, I couldn't stand it if she came. I should probably borrow one of Leslie's guns and blow a hole in her corsets. Larry, I do wish you wouldn't say things like that in front of Jerry. I'm just warning you. There was a pause. Her mother polished her spectacles. But it seems so eccentric to keep changing villas like that, dear, she said at last. There's nothing eccentric about it, said Larry, surprised. It's a perfectly logical thing to do. Of course it is, breathed Leslie. It's a sort of self-defense, anyway. Do be sensible, Mother, said Margaret. After all, a change is as good as a feast. So, bearing that novel proverb in mind, we moved. Perched on a hilltop among olive trees, the new snow-white villa had a broad veranda running along one side, which was hung with a thick helmet of grapevine. In front of the house was a pocket handkerchief-sized garden, neatly walled, which was a solid tangle of wild flowers. The whole garden was overshadowed by a large magnolia tree, the glossy dark green leaves of which cast a deep shadow. The rutted driveway wound away from the house, down the hillside through the olive groves, vineyards and orchards before reaching the road. We had liked it the moment Spiro had shown it to us. It stood, decrepit but immensely elegant, among the drunken olives, and looked rather like an 18th century exquisite reclining among a congregation of char ladies. Its charms had been greatly enhanced, from my point of view, by the discovery of a bat in one of the rooms, clinging upside down to a shutter, chittering with dark malevolence. I had hoped that he would continue to spend the day in the house, but as soon as we moved in, he decided the place was getting overcrowded, and departed to some peaceful olive trunk. I regretted his decision, but having many other things to occupy me, I soon forgot about it. It was at the White Villa that I got on really intimate terms with the mantids. Up till then, I had seen them occasionally prowling through the myrtles, but I had never taken very much notice of them. Now, they forced me to take notice of them. For the hilltop on which the villa stood contained hundreds, and most of them were much larger than any I had seen before. They squatted disdainfully on the olives, among the myrtles, on the smooth green magnolia leaves, and at night they would converge on the house, whirring into the lamplight with their green wings churning like the wheels of ancient paddle steamers, to alight on the tables and chairs and stalk mincingly about, turning their heads from side to side in search of prey, regarding us fixedly from bulbous eyes in chinless faces. I had never realized before that mantids could grow so large. Well, some of the specimens that had visited us were fully 4.5 inches long. These monsters feared nothing, and would, without hesitation, attack something as big as or bigger than themselves. These insects seemed to consider that the house was their property, and the walls and ceilings their legitimate hunting grounds. But the geckos that lived in the cracks in the garden wall also considered the house their hunting ground.
And so the mantids and the geckos waged a constant war against each other. Most of the battles were mere skirmishes between individual members of the two forms of animals. But as they were generally well matched, the fights rarely came to much. Occasionally, however, there would be a battle really worth watching. I was lucky enough to have a grandstand view of such a fight, for it took place above, on, and in my bed. During the day, most of the geckos lived under the loose plaster on the garden wall. As the sun sank and the cool shadow of the magnolia tree enveloped the house and garden, they would appear, thrusting their small heads out of the cracks and staring interestedly around with their golden eyes. Gradually, they slid out onto the wall, with their flat bodies and stubby, almost conical tails.
Looks like I can't find any more 6, which is great, because I hope I almost finished this color, but we can come back to it later if we need it. No, it's that. Few drops of water for preserve drying. Okay, I feel like that's it for now. We finished 2 colors from 12, 15. It's not bad. Not bad at all. For now I want to go for dinner, and I hope I will return later, like maybe in half hour. So let's check. Let's switch to mine video. Here we are. Okay. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being with me. See you later. Bye bye for now.